Welcome to Chronic Curiosity, where real people have real conversations, driven by curiosity to discuss this life in hopefully an intriguing way. Social media and the internets have woven their way into our lives and psyche, so we'd like to slow it down and be genuine and enjoy this foreign thing called conversation. Like, most of the time, I don't even know what we're going to talk about. We may highlight things our guests have going on, or it may just be us, Tony, Cass, and myself. Often our conversations can swing from one topic to the next, relationships to conspiracies, mental health to ancient civilizations, politics to aliens. But if you're curious enough, they can all connect. The one thing we'll certainly like to do is to connect with you, the listener, by discussing things that you can connect with and discussing things that make you curious enough that you didn't think you could connect with. So we hope you enjoy your time with us and appreciate the time you're spending with us, because we understand that that's one thing you can spend but never make more. In addition, if you do enjoy our show, we hope you could take a minute to show your support. Following and liking our channel on whatever platform you're listening to is greatly appreciated, and it doesn't cost you anything except the calories to clickety-click. And remember, share it with a friend. We love growing this network and hearing from everybody. We also have a website that is linked in the description, chronic-curiosity.com. That's a store where you can pick up some fun, curious merchandise, not to mention some of the most comfortable and curious t-shirts ever, as well as a donate button if you just want to help us and support the show. We appreciate your ears and interaction. Thank you once again. Welcome to Chronic Curiosity. Open mind required. Raw human interaction. Inevitable. And here we go. Perfect.
Am I gray again? Am I dark again?
No, you look good.
All right, solid.
I think we are officially recording, but we, like I said, the way we do it, we start whenever and then go from there.
Also, remind me, if I start going over something I've said before, please, you can say, hey, you mentioned that or whatever, because I'm always trying to give people a baseline of stuff, the way I talk about things. But if I'm just repeating something, just hey, dude, we got that memo or something.
Yeah. Well,
because I go off, so I know oh shit, this dude already said this the other time. So no one wants that.
All right. Well, I know last time we talked, it was fairly it was structured for us, but I feel like from the podcast I've heard you on, it was fairly free flowing comparatively.
Oh, it's always pretty free flowing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like sometimes people have very set things they ask you and whatnot. But for us, even having prepared questions for you was super structured for us. So, yeah. So I feel like we'll be okay. Because I have some ideas that I want to touch on with you. But
yeah, awesome. No, it's cool. I love the free flowing stuff. I just did an interview yesterday. It was so structured. It was by this professor, this college professor, and she was so rigid. And I was just doing it. I was doing it. I was like, all right, I'll answer these random prepared questions. She also had her mic in front of her face, in front of her mouth the whole time. I was just yeah, exactly. I was like, how am I supposed to trust you?
Yeah, we don't have the fanciest equipment here, but at least you usually have to drop it down so people can see your face if you're putting on
I learned to I have mine just hidden. It's kind of my little trick.
Yeah, nice.
Just I have the camera on the screen above me, which is at eye level, and it just works where it's just totally hidden. But that was pretty slick when I figured that out. Before I had it right here, I was oh, I could just shrink it.
Yeah. So
innovation.
Yeah, the way we have it set up is it's where we live in not necessarily a noisy environment, but noisy enough where things go on, especially when you have, because oftentimes last time we had Cass, my wife, was helping out on the side, and she typically usually running all the things. So you have that person there, and then sometimes we'll have, two other people. So we'll have 5 people in a room, and then everything else in the studio isn't real elaborate, so it can get noisy. So I have the mics turned down fairly low, so that's why we got to talk right into them to get that, clear.
Oh, I see.
But and then with the double cameras and the microphone and everything else, I can't.
Yeah,
have that
actually,
camera, like, right in front of my
nighttime's
face.
yeah, nighttime's always good because there's always all sorts of noise and trucks and stuff during the day. So this is good for me too. There's like a relatively busy street like directly behind me, and like cars will back up on it, and then sometimes they'll just get pissed and start like honking, and there'll be a truck. It's just like no one's going down it right now. So in general,
Well, that's good. Yeah, because I think it was we had to end the last one because there was like people like knocking on the windows because you're doing the construction in the back.
Yeah, and so there's also trucks in the front. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's just a whole thing. But there's no one here, so
Perfect.
we're good.
Yeah, awesome. Well,
All right, man, let's do it.
yeah,
I'm getting
Jason,
excited now.
welcome back. So obviously, as we've discussed, you have been on before. I was very excited after our last conversation, and I was wanting you to come back on sooner rather than later, but sooner came sooner than I expected. But for anybody who hasn't listened to your original one, they should go check out Jason Szeftel. It was only maybe a month and a half or 2 months ago at most. But would it be fair, I guess, to make the assessment of, in general, that you're kind of a geopolitical historian / analyst with like a focus on China, if that was kind of your podcast scenario, like your avatar, if you had to put like a frame around it?
Yeah, like what I've been doing for the last couple of years is just putting together a picture of what's going on in China, and it sort of uses all the geopolitical things and the economics and the agriculture and the industry that I've learned. It puts it together and uses China as the test case, not test case, sort of the sort of, I don't know, the case study, I guess. But for me, that works because I've been interested in China since before, like I was really young. It's actually really funny. I had I have a brother with like special needs, and there was a guy who helped him out since he's older than me. So he's like 5 years older than me, who is this Chinese guy. So literally my entire life, there's been like a Chinese person like in and out of my house, like when I was growing up. And it's just been forever. So for me, the China thing is like the culture stuff, the language, all that goes back really far for me. And yeah, like what I'm trying to do is put together some of these pieces so we just stop feeling like we don't understand a thing about what's going on. And China's really a really great one to look at just because it's the major node, like it's the thing that appeared, you know what I mean? Like then the Cold War ended, Soviet Union died, the US is like, getting into celebrity gossip and getting fat and feeling really good about itself. And then, China like rolls in. And that is kind of where we're at. And we're seeing like things kind of break down. And it's been extremely helpful for me to sort of understand where China came from, how it got to where it is, and kind of where it's going. Because it kind of is the last player on this chessboard of like global politics. Like there's not another big country that's going to challenge the United States or challenge everything, except for China. I mean, people will talk about Brazil or India, but there's like a million reasons why those won't work, which we could totally talk about. But China is really like the kind of, it's like this is kind of the last rodeo in a way.
So it's kind of the way I kind of look at it is China's like, it's the unknown because there's so much going on there. We just like, for the most part, from our perspective, like I feel like people just have no idea what's going on. Well, with China, and even more so apparently now, like the rest of the world, like I feel like everything is just kind of falling apart in the last couple of years, but even more so the last few months. The last time you were on, we kind of discussed your kind of general framework around what China has been, how it came to be, what it kind of means to us, and how a lot of people are, afraid of China, but how we really necessarily shouldn't be because they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to make sure that they have, control over I use the I laugh as I say it, control over their own people, but that's kind of exactly what they're doing too. And all the things that kind of surround that, as far as, you know, the history and how that country was kind of formed and how it kind of expanded and all those different things. But like just recently, like I remember like just seeing all the different things from the COVID responses and the United States moving out of Afghanistan and all these different things that are happening. And even now to like, I saw a video the other day where there was this lady, and supposedly it was a video out of France, that this lady was getting just beat to shit by cops because she didn't have her vaccine passport at the mall, and they were like chasing her down and beating her with batons. So like, like I see all these things happening. I was like, you know who we need to talk to? We need to give Jason a call and see like what his kind of feelings and analysis is of all these different things happening. And I got a lot of other things that kind of attached to that. But I guess what have your, you know, kind of, I know you said, I think before we kind of started recording, you said like, because you feel like you're kind of in your hole and because you got so many things going on, which last time you were on, you said you had a book coming out, but that's still in the future, I think. He's like, yeah, don't even mention it. But what have you been kind of going through? He
calls it my albatross. A friend of mine just calls it my albatross. He's like, it just looms over you all day. He's like, what have you been up to? And he'll throw it and be like, how's that book coming? It's like, how's that? It's like, it's awful. Yeah, but well, I'm just curious. Which of the things you mentioned, the woman getting hit with the sort of the batons because of a COVID sort of policy break, and what are some other things that are sort of really hitting you in the last month or two? Because it might help if I sort of respond to that. Otherwise, I'll kind of expand it maybe too far. Like, are you thinking like in the U.S. is it like maybe Biden's vaccine mandate, or
I had that in the back of my mind too. It's everything. Because you know, where you mentioned that you'll come up every once in a while with your Periscope and kind of see what's going on in the news and going, oh, holy crap, and trying to, I have found myself in the last couple of years, I don't know if I'd say paying too much attention to what's going on, but I'm trying to get, I guess I spent so much of my life not paying attention to what's going on. And then realizing that, you know, because of people like I was not paying attention to what's going on, that's why we get into trouble. Because people that can look at a situation and go, hey, this isn't going well. Maybe I should pay attention to this. Maybe I should try to do something to kind of help out. So I started paying attention more and more. And obviously once we started this podcast, it was like I need to be abreast of kind of what's in the news, what's going on. And then, so you see things like, the quarantine camps in Australia. And these like and I understand the idea behind wanting to restrict people coming into the country from just traveling about during a worldwide pandemic, but there seems to be so much extensive things that are happening that for the typical normal person, if you really think about it, it's like, man, like this could very easily slip into a very bad place. Looking at history. So that's why that was when we saw these things. And then obviously the whole debacle with the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan, which in a sense, I think there's a lot of people that can kind of agree with the idea of, hey, like we shouldn't be meddling in these things. Like we've been there for 20 years. Maybe these people just don't want us there. There's a lot of complexity there. But what hit me with that, I'm just going to ramble off a bunch of ideas and topics and we can go from there, I suppose.
Well, I got, well, just
go ahead.
For what you started with. What you started with, just mentioning how like you were the sort of person who didn't pay much attention. And then events got so intense that you realized you had to start paying attention. I think that's something I'm hearing from a lot of people. And I think it's really common these days anyway. And the problem everyone is experiencing is, all right, I wasn't paying attention. Then you're like, all right, but I can Google, I can figure this all out. You go start looking up stuff, and it just freaks you out, everything you see. That's like the problem. I mean, the real issue is we don't have models. We don't have sort of the right models to take in this information and sort of read where things are going, right? Because it just seems like literally unending chaos spewing out in every direction. I think the big frame to keep in mind, the most helpful frame that I found to sort of explain some of these broad problems is, well, so in late 80s and 90s, we got globalization, right? Globalization, everything, the world's coming together as one. It's all unifying. All these places are joining the globe, and I probably talked about this the other time. That you had all the transport technologies, and you had all the information technologies that made all this possible. Well, now we're going through basically deglobalization. We're going through the opposite thing, and COVID has accelerated it, and it's really creating tensions within and between all sorts of countries. And a good thing 9/11 having just been hitting the 20th anniversary of it recently, 9/11 brought up a lot of what you're seeing like with Australia, where there's a big problem now in Australia and Anglo countries in the US and everywhere in the Western world as well, just between basically liberty and security, right? And this is actually what we had after 9/11, when we had all these, all these airport measures and all these security concerns, the Patriot Act, all this stuff came up. And it was a similar thing. And in a sense, that was also like, hey, in 2001, we had the sense where, hey, roughly speaking, you let the certain parts of the Muslim world, the more extremist elements of the Muslim world, enter this newly globalized world, and suddenly you could have, death and chaos and stuff you can't deal with. And you have all these problems, and all these interconnections are now a threat and not this boundless opportunity, boundless sort of promise. And we had a bit of that then, and we went on some misadventures in the Middle East and didn't really solve anything, and it didn't go away. But what we're seeing now with COVID, with China, with all these other countries is this is sort of deglobalization at work. And the reason globalization was so good is because it made life possible for a lot of countries. Like, let's take Australia as an example. Like, Australia has been sending all sorts of resources to China, natural resources, and that's kept them growing basically till I think in 2020 for like 20 straight years or something, 14 straight years. They had a great economy and just grew and grew and grew because they were feeding the machine in China and other places. There was all sorts of things, but that was a really big part of it. But you get these big export markets. You can import any resource you need. If you don't have water, if you don't have electricity, you don't have fuel, you don't have food, you don't have fertilizer, you don't have iron or bauxite or anything, you can get all of it on these, ideally on external sort of traded international markets. That was a huge thing. I mean, that's a big reason why countries in Africa, for example, were able to get above terrible subsistence, poverty, and misery. And what we're seeing in Africa is basically all the ethnic coalitions that had made a lot of states semi-viable in Africa. Well, they're all breaking down because you're not able to get a sort of minimum prosperity that can be spread around to appease all these groups. So you have basically a huge amount of state breakdown all throughout Africa as well, which we don't talk about as much because it's not on people's radar. But this is just, in a really terrible way, this is unfortunately the world we're living in. I might have mentioned last time how the 2020s in many ways is not going to be maybe the nicest place. And a big reason why is this deglobalization process. And China is again a great reference point because it's the king of globalization in a way, right? It has 33% of all manufactured things on Earth are made in China. And the system required, all the global interconnections to send every little piece, send every little input, send everything to China is immense. And we're seeing that break down. So that's sort of the central production node. One way to think about it is that the United States is the main consumption node in the world. A node just being like, this is the place where we consume all the shit everyone makes. And we create the random shit we desire, people try and make. So we'll spend our useless money on our useless shit. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, and then in China,
I feel like you put it pretty well.
Yeah. And then in China, you build all that stuff, and that's kind of the way we set things up after in the 80s and 90s. And well, that whole thing's breaking, and we don't have anything to replace it. We really don't. What's basically happening is the U.S. is kind of renationalizing a lot of things. Like, I might have mentioned last time that Biden is insanely economically nationalist in a lot of ways. he's more so than Trump. You don't really see it in the media or the policy, not in the media. You don't see it in sort of media commentary, but in the policies, it's really there. And I mean, he's attacking, he's trying to probe China for like industrial subsidies and all these things where it's like, yeah, probably if they have a third of global production, they might have tried to incentivize people to come here to do stuff. But I mean, there's just all these ways where things are being, reconsolidated in major countries that can really sustain themselves. And there's not many countries. The US is a big one. Places like Australia need this global world. Places like Europe have huge problems just with their demography, with their proximity to Northern Africa, to the Middle East, to refugee flows, to all these problems. It's terrible. I mean, the problem is, I'm not going to say, I can help give context for this, but I can't say, hey, the Middle East is going to be a paradise. Hey, Africa's turning into the Garden of Eden, that kind of thing. But it's this context. I mean, I think really the frame of globalization happened for a while. There's a bunch of reasons why globalization is rapidly retreating. And that's a major problem. I mean, the U.S. leaving Afghanistan is kind of part of that. Leaving when, the U.S. was part of the reason we were in the Middle East is to secure all these energy flows for everyone around the world, because energy is like the primary thing in industrial civilization. Civilization needs energy. Even agriculture, food is really just energy that we eat. Everything, the fuel, the fertilizers, everything runs on energy. The power, the lights in our room, the Zoom, everything, the Skype, everything we're using, it all needs energy. And back in 2005, 2006, 2007, when we were really heavily in the Middle East, we were protecting energy flows all around the world for ourselves, but really also for Europe and for other places like East Asia that really have no other choice. Now the U.S. is basically energy independent. Ida just hit a massive storm, just hit southern U.S., and it knocked out an enormous amount of offshore energy infrastructure, as well as all sorts of chemicals and refining facilities that are onshore. But it doesn't matter. We have the shale revolution was an enormous transformation. There's domestic, the U.S. is an enormous, basically the largest producer of oil and natural gas, basically on Earth. And it's just changing the calculus of everything. What no one expected. In 2005, if you told Dick Cheney, hey, Dick, in a couple of years, we're not going to need any of this oil anywhere at all, any of it. He'd have laughed and cackled or something in our face.
So, there's a lot to unpack right there. Honestly, don't even know where to begin. But so maybe we'll let me ask this. So you mentioned Biden at this point being very it seems coming off as very nationalist with his energy type in the economy as it were. Well, I guess talk on some of the, if you could, like, what do you see from that perspective? Because we've talked about last time, we're in Ohio, a historically red state. So a lot of people could hear that and be like, this guy was talking about he support Biden, So I guess I'm curious as to what do you mean by that when you say that he has shown, as far as his policies go?
Yeah, I think Ohio is a great kind of place to sort of tackle it. I think that some of what Trump's victory showed to the left in the United States was that basically part of the reason that the left, and Biden in particular, is more economically nationalist on sort of industrial and economic matters is that Trump was very popular. Like his policies and his program, basically vis-a-vis China, was really popular. Let's smack China down. Even the left was like, hey, tariffs aren't the way to do it, but they weren't saying don't do it. You know what I mean? Like it was more like, oh, Trump's an idiot. Like he's just doing it a stupid way. If we were in power, we'd do it a smart way. That was kind of the gist of it. And yeah, that's kind of what Biden is trying to do. He's like, yeah, Trump just did it in a stupid way, but we're going to do it in a smart way. But really, what's really funny, these industrial subsidies he's about to probe, it's using the exact same law that Trump used for the tariffs. Like it's just like slyly,
just words it differently.
Yeah, just words it differently. And honestly,
like politicians, surprise, right?
Yeah, totally. And another thing, so the head of the U.S. Trade Representative, which is kind of it was under Trump, it was Lighthizer, and he was sort of an old trade lawyer, steel lawyer, and he was kind of smacking it to China the whole time. Biden chose a Taiwanese woman to be his trade representative. It's like, dude, like, are you, like, that's, talk about like flicking like gum in like China's eye. That was a huge part of it. But yeah, I know. And then a lot of other things. So there's just so the big infrastructure bill has all sorts of sort of content coded things where you get extra subsidies, you get this, you get that, if it's built in America, if it has X amount of US content, which is also very similar to what Trump did with the new version of NAFTA. It was like, hey, you need X amount of American content. And I think I might have mentioned this last time, but what's also going on is that this is also where industry is moving anyway. So in the globalized world, you had like, let's build everything in China and sell it all around the world. Now, what companies are doing, Tesla's a great example, because it's kind of the largest new US industrial manufacturer. Tesla's policy is basically, let's build a factory for Europe in Europe. Let's build a factory for China in China. Let's build factories for the United States in the United States. So you're co-locating production with the expected consumption. That is where things are going. And so the U.S. is Biden and Trump and everyone in government is trying to just take advantage of as much of this sort of industrial reconfiguration we're seeing in the world. So as the world deglobalizes, people are moving out of China. They're moving to Vietnam. They're moving to all sorts of factories and production. I mean, and everyone is trying to incentivize things into the U.S. And so another thing, I think it was, I don't know if it's actually led by Biden, but Schumer in particular, the Senate Majority Leader, was pushing this competitiveness bill. Yeah, Chuck was pushing this bill to compete with China. It was a tech bill, and it gives tens of billions of dollars to bring semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. And so you're seeing the three large manufacturers, which is basically Intel, TSMC, which is a Taiwanese manufacturer, and then Samsung, the South Korean one. They're all building like 10 billion plus plants in the US for semiconductors. So the chip shortage has also been a major thing. COVID brought like all the PPE. We didn't have we didn't have the personal protective equipment, right? We didn't have that kind of stuff. We didn't have ventilators. We didn't have all this stuff. That really supercharged the sense that the US needs to build its own stuff, have its own stuff here. Like if we didn't have vaccines that were made in the US, people would be even more pissed. And really, a lot of drugs are actually built, the APIs, the basic units they're made out of are all coming from India and China. And some of the stuff from China is really sketch, to put it mildly. But
wait a minute, you're telling me stuff from China could be sketch?
yeah, exactly, right? No, and it's bad. And so yeah, all this stuff is coming together. And now you have just like, so I don't know, the media kind of just stopped reporting about it like maybe a month and a half ago, but these supply chain problems are spreading to like everything. I'll just give you an example, personal example. I got a roof rack for my car so I could, put my board on top very easily. It's great, a surfboard, I mean. And I got a cheap one off of Craigslist. I didn't want to pay the full price. And it was this whole thing where I got all the little pieces for exactly the price it would have cost if I had just bought the thing, but I didn't get these caps, little end caps you put on the roof rack. And these end caps like do not exist on Earth right now. It takes like months to get them, like months. I still haven't gotten them. I got this thing like months ago. You cannot find these anywhere because they're just, the supply chains are crushed. And in LA, the LA complex, LA Long Beach Port is the largest port complex in the U.S. There have been ships that are just sitting out, dozens of ships waiting because there's so much weird imbalances of supply and demand and capacity all over the world. It's just a disaster. And so it's hitting everything, and it's pushing people all around the world, governments all around the world, to try to be as economically nationalist as possible. The U.S. just has the tools to do it, and and Biden. I mean, the sort of, there's more of a sort of democratic liberal agenda of all this, kind of to reconfigure the U.S. economy for all sorts of things. But part of that, you kind of need things to be built in the U.S. kind of makes that all easier. So that also feeds into it. But yeah, I'd also say to like the people in Ohio who maybe listen to this and thinking, hey, this guy's like saying Biden's nationalist, that's crazy. A lot of the ways we're wording things don't fit anymore. Even like Republican, I don't know if I talked about this last time, but conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, these words don't mean jack shit anymore right now. I'm sorry. Like,
amen.
Like yeah. if you were a Republican in 2000, what did that make you in 2016 or 2020? You could be a totally different person. And actually, the way it works, I probably talked about this, how the parties are just labels. The parties are labels, and within the parties, there's these shifting coalitions of different groups. There's environmentalists and Greens and LGBT activists, all these sorts of things on the left. There's business people and evangelicals and sort of abortion activists, all these things on the right. And you eventually, there's a big tent, and in the country like the US, you get these two big parties. But the actual coalitions within the parties shift around. So 1960, if you were a Democrat, you were like a Southern sort of segregationist, right? That's what you were. And if you go back to another 60, that's actually what the part. That's like the huge part of it. You go back to 1860, Republicans were freeing slaves under Lincoln or whatever. So it's just the names have stayed, the labels have stayed, even as the actual content and meaning of it is shifting. And right now, it's just total flux. Like they're actually shifting. The coalitions, who means what, who wants what, is shifting around. We're like right before our eyes. But we're like still using the labels. So it's like, I mean, I have a friend of mine. He was the head of a college Republicans, and he was a huge thing. And he was so viscerally against Trump that like he's like rejected all politics and everything. And he's like a monk now or whatever. But in general, it was like a huge part of his identity. And now it's just gone. And that's a lot of people just kind of out in the wilderness. So I kind of went off there. But in general, I was just going to say that really there's sort of a more nuanced and textured thing. If you just kind of remove the politics, you think like, hey, like Biden's clearly trying to bring semiconductors manufacturing back to the U.S., certain electronics things. He wants all sorts of API, which is the pharmaceutical stuff, moved to the U.S. There's a whole category of national security, basically national security goods that's emerging that the military is also interested, because the military is trying to completely reconfigure the defense industrial base so it doesn't rely on things from China, which makes sense. And it's all kind of roping into this. And I think that the pandemic really just exposed a profound sense of vulnerability for Americans, for the U.S. government, that is going to lead to, like things. It doesn't matter who's in power. You're going to try and have as much brought back to the U.S. as possible.
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna have to I have to put like a timer on you, because you go over so much so fast that my little monkey brain can't compact it all and like put it into neat categories. But so kind of what I heard was we're transitioning, and I'm going to use because I know we talked about this last time too, cryptocurrency, Bitcoins, and this type of thing. And decentralization. So what I'm kind of hearing is that the world is going back to, in a sense, like centralized decentralization, to where you're kind of, do you predict that we're going back to these, local markets? And I mean local in the sense of like nationwide, or just kind of our neighbors, to depend on the everyday things, because we've realized through COVID and whatever that may be, that's a whole different topic that we can touch on too. Because of the shipping and trade routes and everything else, that we might be kind of shifting into this new, I'm going to use the word industrial revolution for lack of a better term, but this new age that we're going to start trading and kind of localizing, certain aspects throughout the nation for certain things. And that's because, it seems like China is kind of trying to really double down on trying to make their last kind of push to be one of the big players in the world recently, with a handful of different things amongst everything else going on. But do you think that's kind of where we're going, as a decentralized or centralized, decentralized kind of environment?
Yeah, it's sort of, I think different parts of the world will look kind of different when the sort of the globalization, the giant, cloak of globalization sort of pulled back. Sort of different regions will sort of pattern out differently. But sort of clarify what I was saying earlier in like a more pithy way, we're going through this industrial transition, global sort of economic industrial transition, at the same time as our party system is undergoing its own, reorganization. I think that's part of the reason there's so much chaos, right? no one, even Democrats or Republicans, they don't trust the people at the top of their party. Mostly, they think it's total garbage.
God, I hope not.
Yeah, I know, right? So it's like no one trusts anything, and then the media is kind of it's kind of like a wild west, right? Like it's just like you and I mean, we're on,
I feel
we're
like
a media
I feel
company.
like it's a wild
Spoiler.
west that they're like, what is it? Were they I just lost the word. Where people LARPing. That's what they're LARPing the Wild West. I feel like the media is like the LARPing of the Wild West. They're not actually the Wild West. They're just pretending like they're the Wild West.
Right. I just mean that just in the sense of like I could create like some sensationalist story and send it to a tabloid and it would just be like everywhere tomorrow. That's kind of what I mean. But I hear what you're saying. The media companies are just large corporations and they're acting like they're all free and this and that. I think that's really true. But more I was just trying to get at how the political system's undergoing change, the domestic political system's undergoing change, the global economic and political system is undergoing change, and then the sort of media channels, the sort of information sources we use to get a read on things, are kind of untrustworthy, kind of in flux themselves. The traditional media is trying to like preserve itself. It's totally failing, right? You can't really. Basically facts are free and everywhere. So it's all spin, it's all commentary and personality.
Right.
So you're never going to be New York Times is just like another place to get facts and like stories and opinions if you want it. Right.
Do you think? But I don't know. This may be just a question for you and kind of the region you're from. Do you or the people that you interact with? Do you feel like that people have a general whether it leads one way or another, a trust or like mistrust in all media or maybe not mistrust. That's overplayed. A general sense that whenever you see a news article or, an online article or something like that, that the average person has to kind of filter it and go, okay, let me look into this news story that I'm reading, because is this really true? Like, do you get a sense that, because at least there's been I would say an overwhelming amount of people that we've talked to, whether it be on the show or people that we just interact with, that maybe not a direct mistrust in everything, but just a general questioning of, you see something, you go, is that really true? Like, I almost feel like I have to do some research to find out if this news story that I'm being delivered is, how much validity comes with it. Is that kind of a feeling that you have?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of skepticism, but I also have this sneaking suspicion that everyone has like one or two secret things that they go read and they shut off their filter and they just like take it all in. Like I have a friend I know people who, Drudge Report, it could be MSNBC, it could be Drudge Report, it could be like random environmental news sites. It feels like people have like a little, like we want something where we can just sort of be unbiased and unfiltered and just accept it. But in general, I think, just let your guard down, right? You don't want to be like, all right, I'm reading, like, let me like put on the armor. Like it's time I need to put on mental armor and get a shield, like make sure if like nonsense get filters through.
Maybe that's why I'm so exhausted, because I feel like I'm that 99% of the time. Like,
yeah, well, it's a real challenge. Like if for people kind of like you were mentioning for yourself, who if you kind of had been paying attention to the way, the world, and then you're trying to do it now, that's a rough time to do it. So for me personally, I was reading all sorts of stuff, and I think probably 2005 to 2008, 8, I was like really into things. I was reading things like The Economist, like cover to cover, and it was like I was really into that. And then the financial crisis hit, and I was like, I don't trust any of these people, any of them. Like tossed all this stuff. I was like, you're dumb. This is stupid, total bullshit. And then like I've always gone like back and forth between like reading news all the time and then like not doing it. And eventually I kind of needed to build models in my brain that I felt were secure before I just like kept consuming information. And that's, I think that's the way to do it. We just like, so remember last time I was trying to say that I'm making this course, and I'm trying to do something like that with this course where I could give people like, hey, like here are things about how things have worked. And, talking about China, the reason I don't go all the way back thousands of years because I want to with China. It's just like that place happened to develop really in the first millennium BC. So if anyone talks about China and they don't know anything about that time, it's just like, that's cool. But like you could make debates that the stuff that happened afterwards wasn't even real China, like a lot of it. Mongols weren't Chinese. Qing wasn't Chinese. The Tang dynasty wasn't actually Chinese. The Sui dynasty wasn't actually Chinese. So it's all political and all that kind of stuff, but it's just kind of the way it works. But if you're just trying to keep up with current events, there's something just like pernicious about it. Like I actually heard someone was mentioning that there's some old social thinker who'd said that we lost like a public discourse in this country because we actually don't have anything like you could only read about things if you have some action to take afterwards, right? Like if you read about like some, they're passing some bill in Congress and you're like, I'm going to learn about everything in this bill. And you're like, all right, you don't have any role. I think there's something we need. If citizens need some sort of role, and it's got to be beyond like every popularity contest every 2 or 4 years. It doesn't quite work. And even oh, go on.
I would say, but you have to understand what you're hearing first, right? So I think you're speaking to me a little bit ago where you said like the year 2005 2008 where you kind of started learning about something. And then as soon as you started like being able to understand it, you realized it was all bullshit. So then this is all bullshit. Throw it all away. So I fully understand that because that's where I have been. In the recent past. So how did you form that mental construct of being able to look at things and form your own opinions and to filter out the bullshit and to get the stuff that, okay, this is facts, this is stuff, and tying that into, it sounds like a really neat idea we're talking about, like you said, you talked about last time, is making a course that doesn't give information, but it gives kind of the framework of how to get information, if I'm hearing that right.
Yeah, or like it's sort of like basic information that can tell you how to take in sort of the current stuff, right? It'll talk about like, why do countries have this sort of population? Why do these countries go to war? Why does this happen? Why does that? Why does this? And it's not really about now. It's about like, you can look back and be like, that's why like, the I don't know, the Persian dynasty or the Persian empires or like the Ottoman Empire, all these things, certain things happen to them. I think that's really key. I'll also say, it's just sort of, I don't know if I got into this last time, but I mean, the answer to that question is honestly, I had to just like grind. I feel like, like, those, you see the dirt. No, I'm thinking of like boot camp where you're like, there's like wires above you and they're forcing you to like walk in the mud and it's like splashing your face, or like crawl in the mud and just like splashes your face constantly. That's kind of what happened to me. I mean, so let me just give context. So in undergrad, notwithstanding all the China stuff, my major was rhetoric, which is basically argument. It's about how to look at and study argument. It's about reading, writing, speaking, and doing that. But I did rhetoric at Berkeley, which is a great school in a lot of ways, but it's also really rife with all sorts of things that are not conducive to free thinking, ironically, anymore. And what that meant is that you're learning about argument in a place that isn't really quite doing argument right. So you're just literally from the beginning, like, that's weird, that's wrong. I was doing it from the beginning. And then I did law. I mean, I have a degree in law, and it's just more arguments that are false and weird and fake and all sorts of very elaborate, intriguing and like clever and insidious sorts of ways. But it's almost like I really took the hardest route possible, where I'm always going through really bad, really terrible arguments, and you sort of I came out the other side. That's why I'm not trying to say like, oh, use my model. I think something like, if I could make a course where I could like abstract away all the nonsense I had to go through and provide something that was sort of the jewel that has many of the information, so you don't have to go through the stuff that I did. This is kind of what I'm doing with the China book as well. That seems more valuable. one thing I've been really encouraging people to do is I think that we have this overemphasis on politics, which is really disastrous for our personal lives and our souls on like some sort of deeper level. Like,
amen.
Like
Yeah,
it's just,
I hear that.
it's so wrong. Like the way a lot of these things, so all the stuff we're talking about, like let's say we were alive in the 1500s. Giant religious wars are taking over Europe, right? People in Italy are like, how dare they just desecrate the Virgin Mary? And they're rolling up into Germany. Germans are like, how dare these florid heathens do XYZ? They don't allow us to speak our own language. And it's just like duking it out. Hundreds, tens of millions of people died. If you had like social media telling you what's going on, like minute by minute, like it's like, you're going to go crazy. Like a lot of these events, terrible as they are, they're going to just play out. And having models for things is so much easier because you don't have to sort of take it all in, but it's really tough. But we're also just pushing ourselves so much to try and understand all of this when it's just like, we can't do a lot about it. You can't do a lot about it. And, I do feel like the deeper things that we need individually, sort of with our relationships, families, communities, it has very little to do with any of this as well. Obviously, you want your friends and family, people to be safe and things, but there are a lot of deeper things I think are more important. Like I don't know if I said this in the last one, but like people need to look at learn about history, learn about religion, learn about art, learn about science, and not like the stuff that's just contemporary or whatever. Like this stuff is really, really grounding and powerful. I don't know. Do either of you ever do martial arts? Do you ever have a phase with martial arts?
I would like to.
You like to?
I would like to. I'd love to do jujitsu. That would be like one of my favorite things because of the aspect of it to where it's all about control, and it's not necessarily about the damage you do, but about the control that you're able to have, in de-escalation. And it's one thing to be able to throw I'm not a small guy. It's one thing to be able to throw a big fist and knock somebody out. But, we've actually had a jiu-jitsu instructor and black belt on the show.
Oh, nice.
And, for reference, I'm about 230-ish pounds. But I mean, he's what's Manchak weigh? Like maybe like 165?
165, 170, yeah.
Yeah. And to be able to look at somebody like that and just go, you could treat me like a little child if you wanted to. Like crazy. Just be able to like, so like that, so that's just like a fascinating thing, like for, the efficiency that somebody can have with their body, or, even mentally at some points being articulate. It's like psychology is kind of maybe not psychology necessarily, but it's kind of like a martial arts of the brain, or being articulate maybe is a better word. Being able to be extremely articulate with your thoughts, and because that's something that I aspire to do. Like those things are fascinating, to be able to have complete control of the situation because you know what's going on. Like I've always been fascinated by that. I don't know. Yeah,
I've always loved martial arts. And also say that jiu-jitsu, that stuff's crazy when there's some dude who's like a third your size and he'd toss you over his shoulder like you're a bag, like you're a pathetic little bag, and you're like, and then you're on the ground and you're like, I'm gonna die. No, so I agree with that. And then I also think you're nailing it. That what I was trying to get at is what you were saying at the end. It's the so I'm going to go on a long thing about martial arts and where it came from in China. And this is probably really cool to get back to that sort of stillness and the ability to sort of handle chaos and have control over yourself and your environment. So I mentioned last time that first millennium BC China, when the whole civilization was coming together, was a very brutal place. Did we kind of go over this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 500 years of relentless,
constantly
nonstop
overtaking
warfare.
Each other, the territories, and they were just,
constant violence, constant war. And that, the struggles in the North China Plain there, that is actually that's why we have The Art of War. That is a book that was written for that period. It was resonant throughout the rest of the world and through all sorts of conflicts around the world because it was such a profoundly violent place. It's actually the same thing with the original Chinese martial arts. They all developed around 2,500 years ago, roughly, in and around the North China Plain. And in an ideal world, there would be as many people doing some form of these martial arts, I think, as there are people like women in LA doing yoga. I think that would be a very good thing. But
I feel like it's a lot of people.
Yeah, I know, right? Maybe it's like maybe people would be a little too badass if we did that. It's like everyone is doing martial arts. Yeah, maybe that's a good thing.
But the more dangerous everybody is, the more peaceful everybody is around them.
Yeah,
right?
totally. It's so true. The dudes who can really wreck you, no one's doing it. They're chilling. That's usually how it is. Yeah, exactly. No, and so these particularly these martial disciplines developed in China 2,500 years ago. They're like everything in East Asia, at least, is sort of stemmed from there. So all the stuff that developed in Japan, South Korea, so whether that's Taekwondo, various forms of Japanese, karate, judo, stuff like that. That was all. And then the stuff that moved to Brazil, and there's a whole legacy of all that. But originally, the reason what these martial disciplines were meant to do was to provide basically the capacity to control yourself and to create stillness and peace within chaos. That's what it was. It was an individual discipline designed to try and create that capacity within people. Because the idea being, the reality was that the world is so chaotic. Ancient China, it's like it's so messed up. You're never going to figure this out, but you can control yourself. And in doing so, you can create all sorts of benefits for everyone around you and for your own capacities and stuff. And I bring that up because these disciplines, like the value of learning something like that, of being able to get to, like what you were saying, not necessarily through martial arts, but to get that ability to have that sense of stillness, sort of detachment, quiet, comfortable articulation, instinctual response, all of that, and have it very, very grounded, very present. Investing in something like that is probably more worthwhile than trying to figure out all the chaos, right? Because it's just going to keep expanding in a lot of ways. So yeah, I feel like these are the things where whenever you have a sort of intellectual mind, you always want to understand all these external things, but a lot of what gives us the capacity to do it is actually when we actually can slow down and sort of chill out, slow it down. I don't know. I feel like I'm one of those jujitsu guys who's come on and is giving like ancient wisdom in that sense. But I just think it's so valuable. Also personally, like I know people like yoga and they can do all this crazy flexibility stuff. But whenever you've seen like a dude like break like 15 cinder blocks with a punch, it's like I was always more drawn to that than to like the cartwheel backflip sort of thing. So maybe that's where a bit of that comes from.
So it's fascinating to hear you talk about some of these things, because it's just you're striking bells that I just didn't know were there. But I guess maybe to kind of, as much as I don't want to, no, you know what? Forget it. So what has the last couple years been like for you? I'm going a completely different path than I expected to. But I was just kind of curious. Obviously, last time we talked with you, you're living in the LA area. I don't even know exactly what that constitutes. Like, I'm not going to ask you for your address. Although technically I do know it. How do you like the shirt? You got the shirt?
Yeah, the shirt's good. The shirt was good. I thought that was very cool.
Cool. I'm glad you got it. I hope it's comfortable as I say they are. They're one of the most comfortable t-shirts that I've ever had. So
the problem is I got black when it's so hot in LA right now. I was just like, yeah.
Well, I can send you some other ones in other colors.
It's like you send me a bright pink one. It's like, I got you, man.
Yeah, I can get you bright pink, white, whatever.
Yeah.
But what is because I've heard a lot of different stories about what California has been like during this whole COVID debacle, and obviously with the whole Newsom recall thing happening, like personally, like what is it? What do you see going on out there, and what's life like for you out there? Because I don't know anybody from, like, I know, like, we've talked to people from like Alaska, and we know people in all different states, but I don't think I have personally ever talked to anybody in California. especially the LA area. Like, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been. I had one of those bubbling, sparkling waters before, so it's just been gas all the time.
It's fine.
LA. I mean, it's been. Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of place that has more restrictions. I mean, what I'm doing is I basically, I wear a mask, not because I've ever been really afraid of getting sick, although there's that. It's just, I do it to not freak people out. The people are very sort of worried. There's a lot of nerves. I think there's also like sort of an older population in the area I've been in. There's a lot of hesitancy. I mean, actually, what's really interesting is the stuff I do is like I go surfing, I go biking, I play tennis, like I'm playing basketball, I'm doing all these things. It's like I'm not really noticing, like I kind of have these things I do. I'm not working in an office, right? So I'm not sort of going through all those things. If I was at like, big corporation, a consulting firm, a law firm, something like that, it would be very different. But I have, my friend group, I have family in the area, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on. I mean, in general, I stopped. I mean, during 2020, I wasn't doing much. I mean, it was a real lockdown. I don't know how things were as much in Ohio, but things died. You couldn't go. There wasn't stuff to do. There wasn't going out socially or whatever. So there was, very much. I mean, like I said, I got all these things that I'm doing. So like I got a book. I got all these things. So for me, it was actually good in the sense of like, well, looks like you got to do it. You got to actually do it, buddy. You got to sit down.
You got to sit down and write.
You got to sit down and do it. Yeah. Like there were times I remember 2019, it would be like a Friday or something. And I'd be like, I'm just going to go write in a cafe or something, where I just go and I sit around. I do nothing. It's like, well, all that went away and I just kind of really grinded things out. And then a lot of my, I have a lot of friends that are outside the state because I moved back here only a couple of years ago. So I know I kept, I had a lot of, long phone calls and audio, long conversations, stuff like that. And even conversations like this. Like this is sort of like how I would have a lot of the social interaction in 2020 was for sure just like this. Not with a video. I actually like to like stare around when I'm talking to someone. More like, not right now. Like this is cool. But so that's what I was doing a lot of. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. What's really crazy is I visited my sister in San Francisco, where she had just had a kid. Early January, she had her first kid. So I went up there, proud new uncle or whatever. And San Francisco is very intense. Like her unit complex in San Francisco, I remember going to an elevator, like I had a mask on, and a woman was in there with a mask on. She was like, no, please, like don't go in. And I'm like, really? I was just like, that's a little much, but I'm not here to like get at it with people all the time. Like I'm busy. I got other things in my head. I think also like if I was in a zone where I was getting, kind of in that headspace where you're like, I get pissed off at every little thing anyone does that's stupid or irritating. If I had been in one of those moods, I mean, places, it could have been very, very, very irritating. But life kind of constricted down to a much smaller set of experiences, and it kind of worked with what the things I need to get done, that I need to do, that it, at least personally, it wasn't, it wasn't miserably oppressive. But I have friends who just, I saw them for the first time. It's because I stopped kind of going. There wasn't anybody like, so some guys like maybe just go to bars with them. It's kind of friends. So I have some friends like that. I didn't go to bars with them for a year, and I realized when I hung out with them again, it was like this dude had been coding up a storm for Northrop Grumman and not seeing any other human beings. And I was like, damn. And then I felt bad, and I'm like, well, I can't, we all had to kind of focus on ourselves in the kind of the smaller circle here, so I couldn't do all this stuff. But no, it's bad for a lot of people. I mean, I know people who are very liberal who have gotten markedly conservative just during COVID in California. So, we'll see with the whole recall. Who knows how that's going to go? I don't know. Like a lot of people, I can see a lot of pissed people like doing I personally, I voted to recall Newsom, and then I found a guy just because I was pissed at him. I actually never liked that guy. I had a friend who interviewed him when he was like cheating on his wife with his best friend. He cheated on his wife with his best friend's girlfriend or wife or something, then married her. And like I had a friend who interviewed him when she was in college. Like she was in a local newspaper thing, and she was like, he's the greasiest, slimiest dude ever. This is in no way related to and so I've just always remembered that. I've never liked the guy. So I struck out, and I said, there's like, I don't know if you know, in California, it's like, it's hilarious. There's like, you get the recall thing. It's like, yes or no on Newsom. And then it's just like 50 people who you can choose. There's like nothing. And I was like, all right. And I voted for a guy named Major Singh. I have no idea who he is. I have no idea, but it sounded like there's this great book called Catch-22 from like the 60s, 70s, black comedy book. And there's a character named Major Major. And he's like, that was the name of the major. It's just like, so you have to call him Major 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 Major. And it was like the whole joke in the book. And so I saw Major Sing, and I was like, all right, that was really
That's
good.
good enough.
But yeah, I guess it says a lot about my political involvement. But California needs a lot of things to be shaken up here. There's a lot of problems in the state. So Newsom ain't going to fix them. And probably anyone who came in would probably just trundle around and mess things up even more for a while. But a lot of things are already baked in. So
well, I mean, you can't go wrong with Newsom on a bear rug. Have you ever seen that picture?
No.
Like, I don't remember.
What's Newsom on a bear rug?
There was one episode that we talked about it, and Tony brought it up, and I was like, "There's no way." Like, maybe it wasn't on a. He wasn't actually on a bear rug.
No, it wasn't a bear rug, but I think he was with that female that's with one of the Trumps now.
Oh God, the Guilfoyle.
Yeah. But they were like, laying like on like some
they were laying on the rug,
big
like
extravagant
on like a rug
or something like
carpet
that.
in like a very.
This is some like sensual celebrity photography.
Yeah.
You do some in a bear rug here. That's ridiculous.
It was.
Was it a success? Was it hot? Or did he look good?
It was weird.
It was weird. Okay.
Yeah, if it was like the early '90s, maybe. Like
it was the early
90s. No, but I think it's California sounds. I mean, your recollection of it and the people that it just sounds so fascinating that you realize that the vast like differences in personalities. I remember it was early on in the whole pandemic thing. It was like right after the initial shutdowns. I was still working because I was quote unquote an essential worker, whatever the fuck that means these days. But it was like I remember at one point we were sitting down and it was like I think it was like 2 or 3 o'clock. Governor from the Ohio Governor Mike DeWine would come on. And people started making this thing like it was like 2 o'clock wine with DeWine. So people were just like day drinking as the governor got on every day and like started giving his speeches. So we would sit there and watch like, all right, like what's going to happen today? And the wife was off. Ironically enough, she's a nurse, but she wasn't considered. Whatever.
Bizarre.
Yeah, whatever she was worried. Whatever. But it was like just realizing that like we're sitting there like watching the TV like shortly into this, like realizing how crazy this whole thing is. And at one point like they were talking about people that, lived on their own or whatever it was, and like people having struggles because of being like isolated, because they go out, this, that, whatever. And I'm a fairly isolated person in a sense. I always say that the most surprising thing about me is that I do this right here. That I never would have expected it. But I remember like my wife and I both like looked at each other almost at the same time and we're like, I really like you and all, but if you weren't here or if like nobody was here, like I'd be okay just hanging out by myself.
Yeah.
Like this would be kind of cool. Just I don't have to interact with anybody for any reason. Like, and you're going to like make me stay in my house and, watch movies or do whatever all day. Sounds good. But I realize that there are people out there that they need that human interaction. They need that face to face or, it's just in their genes. They go crazy. So it's fascinating to see the different areas and the different people we talk to and the different localities and the different states with the different rules and all these different things that, it affects everybody differently. And, I guess one of my concerns is like with young people that the ability to interact and, in school, like you learn a lot of things in school a lot of bad things, as you're going through, middle school and high school, but you learn so many things interacting with another person that, solitary confinement it's not good for you if you don't know how to deal with life in general. So it was kind of fascinating to see. I've heard a lot about, California, how restrictive it seems to be. So I was just kind of curious,
yeah, I mean, now it's all good, but you nailed it, man. Like I'm personally kind of like you. Like if I had to sit and I could amuse myself and not even learn things and do whatever, like for a very long time. I'm kind of weird. Like I need the interaction, but I don't need I could talk to one person for a long time, and then be super sated for a while. So it's very weird. Yeah, I got my fill. But yeah, I have friends who just they needed the people. It's disastrous. And I think you're really nailing it with the kids, the younger people who need to find new friendships, to get new bonds, make new relationships. It's just been a disaster. It's just been a total disaster. I mean, what's happening is, guys, it's I know more about guys. I don't know how it is. I assume girls are more on social media. Maybe I'm just stereotyping terribly or whatever, but the guys, younger guys that I've seen and talked to, they're just all on Discord playing video games with their friends. That's it. That's at least in the LA region, they are there. They're their buddies are playing games and they got the headset on. They're just all kind of playing games just on the computer.
Shit.
Yeah. And just I don't know, calling some dude a loser and how do you suck so hard? Yeah, but it's bad. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal actually, which was really interesting. It was called "A Lost Generation." It's basically about how men in particular are really suffering in college right now. And it's how now there's basically a 60-40 in the university. The average split in US universities is 60% women, 40% men.
I saw that stat.
That article, I'd go look up that article. It's called Lost Generation. Type in Wall Street Journal generation boys lost, something like that. It just come up. But it was just a lot of the stats and stuff were bad, but the main image, the reason I clicked it was it had the first picture was a guy, he looked like an old friend of mine from high school. It was just sitting in a room. He had his computer there, sort of a small, not much art on the wall or anything, just kind of like a carpet, him, blonde hair, just sitting. And it just reminded, I was I know someone like that. I know people I looked at that, his look, his sort of sense of defeat. It was really painful kind of to look at. And then just reading the whole book, the whole article was frightening stuff. Guys, I'm focusing on guys, but people who you start, imagine if, I went to college in 2010. That was when I started. And if I had 10 years later, if I had been in university, if I had started university or college or anything, any school, any organization, and my life was now suddenly staring at a screen, if paying tens of thousands of dollars or whatever, it's guys, burned out and left and very dejected, disheartened, just disillusioned is really bad. And they're also disconnected from people at the same time. So I watch this kind of stuff for various reasons. What's really interesting is people left, right, all different things. They're very concerned about different things, and whether it's race relations or gender things or whatever. But me personally, I actually focus on, sex relations, men and women, because that relates to demography and whether you actually have children and whether your population continues to grow or not. So in a place like South Korea, yeah, kind of important, we sometimes think. And in South Korea, it has the lowest fertility rate in the world. And basically, my read on the whole situation, there's kind of men in one corner and women in another corner, staring at each other, yelling, angry, pissed off, and that's sort of the end state, right? Because the population is just shrinking, and that's sort of how we end. It's men and women in one corner and the other side of the octagon or whatever, just screaming obscenities at each other. So I worry about that kind of stuff, and I get really freaked out by these sorts of articles and stuff like that. So,
well, I think it's a. We're going through a monumental shift. This is just my, I have no authority or any type of real idea about anything that's going on. I've basically been tuned into our world for the last year. Well, just over a year since we started this podcast. So that's basically my experience about anything.
Yeah.
But it feels like, I've mentioned, like, I grew up in a not super rural area. I've had interactions with cities, and we live in northeastern Ohio, where we have Cleveland, which is it's not New York City. I've been to New York City a bunch of times, so I've been to places, and I've interacted with these people, so it's not like I have no idea. But for the most part, it's been a suburban type of farming life that I've grown up in. But there's just something that just feels like off about the last like 5 to 10 years, where it just seems like maybe not, we're entering some kind of new phase, and I feel like you kind of touched on that, where it's like we're entering a new era, whatever it might be, whether it's the technology, since cell phones, and you have a supercomputer in your pocket, or whatever it is, or we're starting to devolve from this globalization that we've created in the last only 100 years. It's kind of fascinating. We talk about it a lot too, where you realize throughout history how much of history is behind us, but most people are only looking at the last, if you can get someone to consider 100 years ago, really contemplate that, it's like, whoa, wow, life was just so much different back then. It's like, yeah, like you have people were alive that are still alive today back then. So like, maybe, I don't know, is it some such, exponential, growth and movement, and it almost feels unreal. I had somebody text me recently that used to give me a moderate amount of shit for me joking about it, but they said, in a sense, I've never quite contemplated the simulation theory as much as I do now, because it just feels like we're like living through deja vu throughout, like with looking back at history and everything. So it's just, what do you think the future holds with everything that's going on and all of these interactions and the speed that everything advances at these days? Because I mean, look, I originally I wanted to talk about a lot of things, and I guess we still have time, but
like, we got all the time in the world. We can go over everything. So just do whatever hits your curiosity.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in my curiosity, Jason. But like, we just had in the last 60 days, we pulled out of Afghanistan after 20 years. We have the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. Obviously those two things are kind of coinciding. But all the things that have happened in our lifetimes that have kind of changed, and really in the grand scheme of things, they're not those big of events, really. When you look at history as a whole, because the United States has only been around for not even 300 years at this point. So like, maybe we can. I do want to ask you these questions, so I'll stop rambling. But if unless there's something
I got one thought on what you were saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right there, right before the
then
question.
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, it was you were just mentioning how, like, you go into a rural area and a suburban area and all these differences. But the one thing that seems to be constant is, like, I'm talking about deglobalization, basically. But one thing that's kind of different, outside of China, Russia, it's random places that we're not really connected to that much anyway, the information infrastructure will probably continue, even though all the physical connections start to break down a bit more, if that makes sense. Like, you might still be able to text a random friend in the Netherlands, regardless of what's happening, or in Poland or whatever, just as long as countries don't start breaking these sort of links, like governments like Cuba is kind of intentionally breaking sort of internet links with people, with other countries and stuff. The sense that is this sort of flattening of culture through the media, and like we've all sort of grown up with this. I feel like there's people twittering about this or tweet. I don't know. I don't actually mean they're on Twitter, but like twittering as in like they're chatting about this kind of stuff for a while. It's felt like, but there's something where the norm, the baseline now seems to be the connections we have in the memes in the online culture. Like something like that seems like more of the groundwork for people, like that links someone in rural Ohio to someone in suburban California to someone in Eastern Washington, more so than it's kind of hard to figure out what else it would be. Like, right? It would be so polarized. We could have so many different opinions on so many things. Like one person could be like a militant vegan and the other could be like it's there's so many crazy, unique differences these days. And part of what I see, just get into the simulation comment, randomly, is like I see a lot of people basically constructing their own little personal cults with all their own. And I see this in LA a lot. So I'll meet someone who will be into, healing crystals and Reiki energy, and will be totally vegan, and will go on ayahuasca tours. And it sounds like a cliche, and obviously I'm extending it to make it a bit more fun, but things like that. And it's so elaborate. It's like, it reminds me of like, there's like ancient Jewish things like, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, or ancient Muslim things. You're like, that seemed crazy until I see what like a 35-year-old person who has no socio-cultural infrastructure like constructs out of their own world. And I'm like, wow, those old religions seem like way more tame than this dude's like personal cult here. And everyone's always very low key about it. Like, oh, I'm just totally normal. I'm totally normal. It's like, yeah, maybe you also have some random ass cult you got swimming up in your head. So I think about that. And then, yeah, and I mentioned religion earlier. I think for a lot of people, talking about the simulation, I'm not saying you necessarily, but for a lot of people, the super nerdy engineer type who I tend to have a lot of friends of who start randomly talking about the simulation, it's almost always like placeholder for God that they don't want to talk about. That's something I've noticed a lot. It's like that same thing. It's just like, all right, you could say we live in a simulation, and then, possibly there might be someone who made that simulation or make that reality, just not to minimize that whole theory because it's kind of cool. But like for people who bring it up, it's like, bro, you're talking about God here. Like that's what comes to mind often.
I would love to talk about both of those things. But real quick, I have had a long day of drinking a lot of water. Do you mind if I take a bathroom break real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Usually Tony's the one that breaks the seal, and I feel like he's bouncing a leg over there. And I feel like
I'm good, bro. Staying strong.
But I mean, I will have that simulation versus God discussion if you really want to get down into it. But I have
versus God.
Yeah. I'll be right back.
Okay, sounds good. Oh man, where do you get that image behind you?
The cat or the shaman?
The shaman.
It was from a website. It was called like Society something, and it was
Society 6 or something.
Maybe, yeah. I think so. And they're like wood blocks that are printed, and they're pretty cool. It was fairly affordable.
That's cool. So, yeah, I was mentioning the ayahuasca, and that's and then suddenly he disappeared, and like a shaman appeared behind him, and I'm like, yeah, that feels very appropriate.
That's the ayahuasca that he's gotten there. So
yeah, exactly.
That ayahuasca and ibogaine and DMT, and that stuff's pretty interesting. So there's some cool stuff on the horizon with different drug companies that are experimenting with that, with like neuroplasticity and substance abuse and PTSD, and even Johns Hopkins with some of their studies with the mushrooms and the ecstasy and stuff like that. So I was going to ask you a question though, kind of what you were talking about. I guess I would consider them the unintended consequences that kind of came out of COVID. And some more of those obviously being a rise in substance abuse and overdose, a rise in mental health, domestic violence, child abuse, besides, kind of the aforementioned that we spoke about, as well as what I just said, what other unintended consequences have you seen or do you predict? And then I think I'll let you answer that, but even extend that to, some of the things we've seen from the exodus of Afghanistan, which I'm sure Fred don't want to be part of that, but what are some of those unintended consequences that you see coming down the pipeline? Yeah,
I'll start with the first one. Yeah. I think that, God, I mean, there's just a lot, man. I mean, it's just, an ideal situation for someone in sort of COVID. Let's say you're young, you're 18 to 25, maybe. Maybe you could use that time. You could use unemployment if you got it. You could use whatever. You could reskill. You could upskill yourself. You could go online, do a course, do something, somehow develop skills, give yourself more opportunity. I mean, that's sort of the ideal case. But it's a major challenge. And I think that one of the problems we have today is that there's more distractions and diversions than any human has ever experienced in world history. It's a real challenge to kind of doing what you need, what could be most beneficial for you. And among those real, not even diversions or distractions, it's just sort of this temptations, things like drugs, like opiates, like substances, all that. It's immense because it turns the massive chaos of the world that we don't quite understand into a world that feels awesome. Like I remember I had a kidney stone and I had to go to the ER at like 2 a.m. and they gave me Dilaudid, which is one of those drugs like 3 or 4 times stronger than heroin.
Yeah.
I remember being at like a 9 or a 10. The nurse was like, "Hey, like how much pain are you?" And I'm like, a 9, a 10. I have no idea if it gets more painful. You have to tell me. Like I've never anything like. And I still remember I put in the drug and it was like I went from a 10 in pain to like a 10 in pleasure, and I was just like, oh, like it's wild. And I mean that experience. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I was on actually a different podcast where a guy had done a lot of research into opiate and substance abuse. He was explaining some stuff to me about how it originated, how it came from a lot of people who got OxyContin prescriptions and all that. And it's all very dangerous. And we're really playing with fire with these drugs. I mean, I think, I personally believe there's an immense value to a lot of social, spiritual growth that can happen with drugs. But we've all got to learn the lesson from the 1960s, which is that we no longer live in a world where we no longer live in a culture where we're sort of in a small, homogenous, culturally unified group where you have people that can initiate you and can understand your experiences when you're doing these drugs. Now we live in a very fragmented group where you can go and you can do drug like ayahuasca or DMT and your personality can just crumble, right? It's a totally different world. Like if you were a shaman in a small, African, a small sort of like, Amazonian tribe, it's a very different world. Your entire, the language, the culture, everything was unified. It was a small group. It was tight knit. It's so different. So you need different perspective. You need different things to keep yourself in balance when you're doing that stuff. But it can still be amazingly influential. But I mean, I look at the 60s and the wreckage of some really amazing minds who just went way too far out into the cosmos and couldn't come back, couldn't articulate what they saw. And anyone who's done drugs knows like you can't always kind of articulate it, but you want to bring back as much of the peace, the insight, the clarity, the courage, whatever it is that you took from it, and you want to be able to move forward with it. And the challenge is that it can just so much addiction, right? I mean, it can be so addictive. Like you go, I mean, people just getting high. Like in California, weed's legal, and I remember, I mean, everyone just started smoking weed. If not in middle school, then in high school, everyone was smoking weed. And something about suburban life in particular just seems to, there's something dead about spiritually and emotionally dead about a suburb, especially if it's just no one knows anybody. It's just random blocky houses all next to each other. And you're craving something, and a drug gives you an absolute, it's like sex. It's like some surge of feeling, a visceral feeling that feels more deeper connected to you, to the past, to history, to humanity, to life, to everything than you ever experience anywhere else. And it's just, there's no way that doesn't become something you chase after. And so we don't have mechanisms socially to help people against this. I mean, addiction in various forms is like, it just seems like the main psychological issue of kind of the world we live in. So that's the main thing that, to what you were saying. I mean, this various really, really painful, bad, not degenerate, but like sort of unhelpful addictions or in various forms are kind of what I see coming out of COVID. And also a lot of mentalities that go with it where you don't feel like you can change your situation. The total lack of control that we are all feeling. Like one of the reasons we all hate the government trying to knock on everything is like, we all feel like we have so little control of what's going on. And then the government's trying to do all these things we think are often very stupid. And then yet they can still do it, but we're still powerless. I think there's something really, there's something very disempowering about the world we sort of went through, we're going through right now. And everyone needs to find ways to like I mentioned, martial arts, like I mentioned, any sort of thing, getting a knowledge of history, all that. Like these things give you that sense of agency that's really important, because there's still more capacity to sort of make a difference, do things, create businesses, write books, do whatever it is. But it's just so much of it is internal. It's so much of it is our own psychology that we're just constantly warring against, and no one's helping us. I think it was a guy, Naval Ravikant, who's sort of a tech investor, and he said, that the main thing you're fighting against is just, you're just fighting against all the things, like just all the pleasures, all the joys, all the things that like are reaching out to you that you should do this, you should do that, when really you need to find kind of, things that you're building and creating that can actually move you forward. And if you kind of fall off that path, even for a bit, you just slip right into like random, seemingly pleasurable addictions. I don't know if that was helpful. And then you asked another thing. The second question was about 9/11. No, it was about pulling out of Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, some of those unintended consequences that you see coming down the pipeline.
Unintended consequences. Well, I have a different perspective on Afghanistan. Anyone who's like, a lot of people are saying, oh, China's going to roll in there. It's like, do this, do that. If China was smart, the one lesson they would take from this would be like, hey, how about we don't go into Afghanistan and we just leave Afghanistan and do what the British and the Soviets and the Americans somehow didn't manage to figure out. That would be the really smart thing that China would do. And realistically, all this stuff about China taking over Afghanistan, this is just the media taking advantage of this 2-3 week story about Afghanistan and then the negative pullout and kind of all the the bombings and stuff, and just it's a great thing for the media to take advantage of locally right now to sort of hype the story of American decline, chaos everywhere, bloody headlines. But Afghanistan is going to revert to what Afghanistan has always been, which is basically it's going to have no electricity. It's going to be probably suffering famine. It's going to have no money for any of its basic services. It's going to have absolutely nothing. There's all this stuff about industry and there's going to be all sorts of mines and things you could get out of Afghanistan to, make it wealthy. It's like, okay, yeah, there's probably $1 trillion or so of minerals that are in the ground in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan has no history of any industry whatsoever, let alone heavy industry, let alone mining, let alone any regulatory agency to regulate anything, let alone credit. It has nothing. It has zero infrastructure for any of it. And the only country that would ever go in there to try and make anything out of it would be China. But China needs to do that in parts of China, and it doesn't want to do. No one wants to do this in Afghanistan. It's hilarious. The Taliban trying to negotiate a contract with the Taliban just sounds like the most ridiculous thing ever. And then what? You want to get into a conflict with the Taliban? Why are you even here? That's basically what it's all going to come to with Afghanistan. But so it's just the saddest part about it. Really, the worst part is it's actually Afghanistan's reverting to exactly what it was in, let's say, September 11th, 2001. There's going to be, Taliban in Kabul. There's going to be a ragtag Northern Alliance in the north. And it's literally, it's as if nothing ever happened, which is the worst part about this. All the blood, all the money, all the time, all the energy, none of it led to anything. It's awful. It's terrible. And this is one of the reasons I got into the China thing. I might have mentioned this watching the U.S. government in 2002. I thought I knew. Who the fuck knew? I didn't know what I knew, but it's I thought in my head, this seems dumb. I don't think this is going to work out. And a lot of people, they thought the same thing, and it totally didn't. But I was just so aghast. It's just so shocking that the U.S. could even blunder into this sort of thing. That is part of what pushed me even to look at this China stuff, to try and not see something try to understand. Even if you couldn't stop the U.S. blundering into something else, at least we could understand it. I think that is sort of unfortunately, the greatest benefit we're going to get out of Afghanistan. We can see how our government messed up, but there's no capacity for the government to actually improve any of its processes. All the people who made the decision to go into Afghanistan and to stay, they're all gone. No one gets punished. Right. No one gets fired. Nothing. So it's awful. This is one of the terrible things about Afghanistan. One of the big unintended consequences is it's going to make the U.S. feel like the rest of the world, none of it's worth anything, because we can't do anything anymore. Afghanistan didn't work, it's chaos. Iraq didn't work, it's chaos. And we're just going to say, we're not going to wash our hands a lot of the world. I think that's the feeling I get. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but that's what I get from everybody. They're like, we don't need to be anywhere. Let's just be here. We can't even figure out our own stuff.
No, I would agree with that sentiment, that there's a lot of people that let's just worry about our own shit fest we have going on. But there's a lot of people that also think that like, like maybe not necessarily a particular thing, but there seems to be a thing that's happening over and over in the recent history with our military affairs, that we get involved with these places, and then the reason that we get involved with these different areas somehow or other changes throughout time, and then at the end of it, it's some different story that the public's given. Like, do you have any like type of, idea of, because first it was, because there's a lot of things that like, all right, well, Iraq was, weapons of mass destruction, this, that, whatever, and then we got to take out Saddam, whatever it is, and then there's some of that story too, where it's like, well, it just happened to be we went out and took Saddam when, he started buying oil and a different monetary, or different fiat currency than ours, but, coincidence, just kidding, or like the Afghanistan, like engagement there, like it, do you think there is any type of, maybe not conspiratorial, but like nefarious military complex government action going on, or do you think it really is just they're blubbering idiots and doing things that they just think that they're like?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I think one thing is that since the 90s, the U.S., like the quote unquote military industrial complex, has really diminished in its scale and power. It's really not this massive force that it was like in the, let's say, the 50s and 60s, when it was really driving all sorts of things. It's very, very, very diminished these days. There's a few companies, and it's much smaller than it was. But I think the way I think about the U.S. military activity since 1945 is it's been a bit of a disaster for a couple reasons. I mean, the big one is that the U.S. just became ridiculously powerful militarily. Like, countries don't have that kind of power in history. You just don't have it. Like, you just think about World War II. It's like the U.S. went and said, all right, we're going to fight a war in Europe, and we're going to fight a war in Asia. We're going to do both of those right now, same time. And you're going to win both. Meanwhile, France is getting pounded for the third time by Germany, right? That's it. Like that's like a major country in the world. It's like, okay, well, clearly these aren't even in the same stratosphere, like these two countries. I'm not trying to criticize France or anything, but we need to get a baseline for what happened, because since 1945, it's almost like in high school, if there's a dude who's just absolutely ridiculously like a Jocko, you have like normal people, and you have like a Jocko in your high school.
But like Jocko's a grown man. Yeah, Jocko Willink's just Jocko, like high school.
18-year-old Jocko. And so Jocko's walking around, and all anyone can think about is like, I'm not trying to get into a fight with Jocko. Like, I'm not trying to do it. Like, that's kind of what happened with the United States in a lot of ways. We're walking around like Jocko, and no one wants to fight us, but we're trying to enforce certain things around the world. So our policies since 1945 militarily have been quite bizarre. Basically what they are, they're sort of oblique. They're always like, we're saying we're doing this, but we're really doing this. Like Vietnam was about fighting communism. Apparently it's like, it was really kind of about appeasing France, and which was trying to leave NATO and to maintain the sort of alliance against the Soviet Union. It was one of these, like, it's always like you're fighting these sort of indirect battles. It's like, oh, we're doing this, but we're for this, but it's really about this. And this is a sort of structure that a military isn't designed for. Like, really, the U.S. military is supposed to pound some random, discrete enemy, right? It's not supposed to fight to the generic abstraction of communism or the generic abstraction of terrorism. Like, this is not what it's meant to do. And it's never going to succeed in that mission. But that mission is very useful if you're trying to do other things. like I was saying with Vietnam, there was that whole thing. And then with Iraq, with Afghanistan, it was just like basically lost the Al-Qaeda in the mountains. Like by December of 2001, we lost Al-Qaeda in the mountains. And at that point, well, they're gone. And unless you're going to roll into Pakistan of all places, which, by the way, is like funny. Like, we've been literally quasi-fighting Pakistan for all these years while having them be our friend. It's just a disaster. But we lost Al-Qaeda in the mountains. And so suddenly we transformed our mission. It's like, we're not just going to just destroy and kill Al-Qaeda and defeat bin Laden. suddenly we're going to reconfigure Afghanistan into Ohio and to make it a place like Ohio. That was crazy. I mean, this was crazy in 2002, but the U.S. couldn't admit defeat. That's basically what happened. We don't want to take the L. We did not want to take the L. The Bush administration didn't want to do it and didn't have anywhere else to go. So it basically wanted a win. And at the same time, you had Al Qaeda diffusing through the mountains, and it was going to Pakistan, it was going into Iran, it was going into the Middle East, and so we ended up we basically smashed Iraq to convince the countries that we really should have attacked would be like Al Qaeda. Would be like Saudi Arabia, which actually housed and trained and all this sort of stuff, all the people. But you couldn't do Saudi. You couldn't smack down Saudi Arabia for energy, oil reasons, obviously. And so we basically tried to intimidate everyone in the region by saying, "Hey, we just crushed Saddam in like 2 days, and if you don't figure out this shit and manage all these terrorist groups in your own country, we're going to do the same thing to you." And what happened is that these countries did manage to get a handle on their internal populations, basically by sort of doing global counterinsurgency and intelligence agreements with the United States. And the whole time, the U.S. population was being fed other stories that this is what's going on. And it's not something, I mean, it's unsavory, but this is kind of how governments have always worked, right? They feed the population one thing, and democracies, you do it during elections, and you do this and that, and then you have the experts that do whatever. But there's a lot of bad problems. I mean, there's the unelected problem. There's there's no accountability. There's really, you can't even say they did something wrong because they didn't actually tell you what they really did.
So if I can,
yeah, go for it.
With this, I'm listening to a lot of what you're saying. It's hurting my brain. But so do you think this would be a fair assessment of kind of what you're saying is that all of the things going on around the world, because it's fascinated me as I learn about the nations and just everything that goes on. And I have a young daughter, and as we start learning about these different countries and where they're placed and where they're at, and their location to each other and their proximity to each other, that and their history and everything else, that could it be a safe assumption to say that, like, because of the isolation we have in the United States, not only geographically, but our knowledge, our understanding of the entire world, our media, giving us this information, whatever it might be, that you mentioned like France just getting pummeled all the time. Well, it's a lot easier to pummel somebody when you're right next door to them all the time, and you hate each other, and you have these century-long conflicts that are happening within right next door. We've talked about before that when the whole Palestine and Israel conflicts really got heated this year, that like you could take Israel as a nation, essentially bend it in half, and it would still fit inside the side of the framework of Ohio. So for all that to be happening in this small little area, we have so much trouble understanding that and fitting it in our brains, that all these things that we kind of completely lose connection with, that we can't even truly fathom and completely comprehend what's going on, when you're talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq and, all these, it's such a condensed area that there's been so much conflict forever.
Yeah.
So
forever.
So that, and so I guess I also want to touch on Saudi Arabia too, because you mentioned that. I have a question for you there too. But do you think that's partially why we have such trouble, or at least me as an Ohio boy, understanding and really comprehending what goes on in Southwest Asia and the Middle East and all those places? Because we just...
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think you nailed it. First of all, the main one is, what is the master framework? If you want to look at history and countries and politics and economics and stuff over time, it's geography. That is the main one. What you're talking about, you're next to this country, or you share a river with this country, or you share a coastline with this country. These are the things where even as states change and you see the same patterns reemerging over the same regions, and that is the master one. That is the best way to abstract away the nonsense and to sort of get at the fundamentals. It's definitely, well, this mountain chain seems to be always filled with whether it's Al-Qaeda rebels or like Baluchi rebels or whoever it wants to be, they seem to always be there for the last 4,000 years. Things like that are really important. And I think you're right. The United States, we're so privileged, we're so blessed with being basically a giant island in North America, functionally. No one messes with us. It's really fun. Like, in China, for example, like above China, they have a giant Great Wall because they didn't have a good mountain chain, basically. And they had to basically deal with, like we had Pancho Villa, in the southern border. They had Genghis Khan in the north. It's just like, this is like,
no comparison.
We don't need there's no comparison here. This is like a different universe. And that's the master one. So the U.S., people always joke the U.S. doesn't know, and people don't know anything about geography. And it's true because we don't need to. We don't. It doesn't matter. Ours is great. And it doesn't matter, but everywhere else in the world, that's all you care about. Little parts of Germany and France where they speak the same language, but they're in the wrong country. And there's this ethnicity, all these maps of like ethnicity and religion and nationality. They don't neatly come together. That's why we have so many problems all over the world. So that's first. We don't get geography, and geography is maybe the most important thing to start putting together all these pieces, for sure. And then the second one is that we also grew up, like since the 1990s, we've had this information revolution, globalization, which makes, everything seem just even less important. It's like, oh, I can talk to anyone anywhere. So we have like kind of this double whammy of being in the US, not needing to understand anything, yet having, we don't understand any of it, yet our government can influence everything. I was like, that's probably not a good idea. I mean, that's probably not a good combo. And then there's just the information revolution has done more to destroy our understanding of the facts of history and geography than anything else ever. Like, I like a lot of stuff in Silicon Valley. I like a lot of it, but even in Bitcoin too, the people really invested in this are so invested in a world where borders and lines and rivers and mountains and plains and fields don't matter. It's like, that's going to blow up so badly in everyone's face, because it's like all of history says all these borders, all these lines, all these divisions really matter, and people die repeatedly over them. So that's definitely part of it. But so you wanted to get to Saudi Arabia.
Are you saying I'm a utopian for believing in Bitcoin? Is that what you're saying? That's not big.
No, not a utopian. It's just, it won't be universal. Like China's already banned it.
Well, yeah, right? Yeah. That was one on the list too. But you mentioned, sorry, I don't need to distract you. Talk about Saudi Arabia. I did have a question for you for Saudi Arabia that I was kind of curious about. Because and we mentioned we've jumped all over the place, which I like. But we've mentioned the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 recently.
Yeah.
And there's been some discussion about the declassifying of some papers that potentially could show involvement of Saudi Arabia in that. And obviously there's some discussion around that of, well, we kind of work with Saudi Arabia for their oil and this, that, whatever. And there's some, maybe collusion, for lack of a better term. It's a hot word. What do you think? Do you think there's any type of, maybe not necessarily validity, because there's obviously some validity to it if they're talking about it, but do you think there's anything that really means anything when it comes to that?
The question is always like, how far up the chain did it go, right? Saudi Arabia is like a petro state run by a religious, basically a royal family connected to a extremist religious group, right? It's basically what it works. Delightful, right? It's like oil, God, and the crown kind of situation there. And the Wahhabi sects there basically spread all sorts of terrible ideologies all across the region. and they were supporting all sorts of terrorist groups all across the region for a long time, including people we funded in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. Right, that was the whole thing. There's almost certainly some sort of involvement between some people at some level in Saudi Arabian government. This isn't rocket science, but was it like the rulers? Probably not. I mean, it's just like real dumb, right? It's just basic. It's real dumb to do it. But again, Saudi Arabia is a bad place. Like, people that don't know, it's like it runs on slave labor from imported populations from like Pakistan and other places. There's basically like a princely class that lives in like air-conditioned palaces, and they have all sorts of servants doing all their work, and all the oil money. This is actually very interesting. I'll go on a brief tangent, but like part of the reason we have this globalized financial system was just because places like Saudi Arabia, when they got all this oil money in the 1970s, remember all the oil crises and oil shocks and all that in the 70s, they had no idea what to do with the money. Like, this isn't China where you could go build a city. They didn't build anything. Literally, what do you do with your money? Okay, you've bought yachts, you've bought houses. Like, we're talking about real things. Like, there's not enough houses to buy. There's not enough yachts to buy with all the money they were getting. So basically, they just sent it back to the West, and it went to banks. And the banks filtered it all through all this. And that's how you actually got a lot of the original sort of, they were called petrodollars, like just sending them around the world, because literally there's nothing to do with them in Saudi Arabia, which is hilarious. It's like, this country, there's nothing to develop there. Without oil, it would literally be sand and tribes. That's how it would be. And so this isn't a place that has anything like a normal functioning administration or government or political framework. Do you know what I mean? Like, basically, there's a whole massive young population that has no prospects. It's basically just subsidized fun and whatever. And like, the second that the oil stopped if it stopped running, the whole place would collapse like a house of cards.
Well, it's like, you see all those videos of those dudes over there drifting cars on the highways.
Yeah, exactly. There's like all the sheikhs, they have nothing to do. It's like, well, let's just imitate all the things Americans do in their really cool movies. It's basically the extent of what they figured out to do.
It's a like, real life movie. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, it's just like Sheikh Bilzerian down there is just like having the best time in the world.
Well, it is scary, but at the same time, it's humorously scary, but it's also actually scary. I don't know. I may have mentioned this because I feel like we touched on Saudi Arabia last time we talked. But are you familiar with the Jamal Khashoggi case? And did you ever watch the Dissident document?
No, I didn't watch it.
It's really good.
That's a documentary?
Yeah, it's a documentary. It's on, I think the only place you can get it is on Amazon. But it's the same guy who, I wish I remembered his name. We've talked about him a couple times. But it's the same guy who did I think it's Icarus documentary, the Russian doping scandal. Yeah.
Oh, I never saw it. I heard that was really good too, though.
Yeah, so I haven't watched that one, but I watched the Dissident, which is the Jamal Khashoggi documentary, and it's sad. But it's also extremely eye-opening, and for anybody, it's a sad as it is to say, it's a well-produced, almost movie-like, documentary where it almost seems unreal. It seemed, we've been so desensitized, with movies like, Saw and different things here that like he did a very good job. I want to say it was Brian Fogel, but I don't think that's right. I think that's the wrong name. But he did an excellent job at producing it to make it interesting to watch. But it, like, Netflix wouldn't take it. Amazon Prime wouldn't take it. The only place, like, nobody would take it for, like, to put it out there for free to pay them for it. So I think the only place you can get it is Amazon Prime. You have to pay for it. But it's a really well done, documentary that kind of navigates that whole situation, and you realize that, like, that place is not a great place to be, particularly if you disagree with them or you you out them or anything like that. And I think I've discussed it a couple times where they show at one point during the documentary that they this is kind of a completely side topic to Jamal Khashoggi, but their Twitter environment over there, where they have he has like an entire control room, and it's probably 150 to 250 people in the room, all in front of computers, and they discussed it like each of these people has 30 to 50 different Twitter accounts. That's their job all day long, is to put out propaganda on Twitter for Saudi Arabia. And it's I would like to say we know nothing about that, but I feel like the Twitter sphere has gotten real weird lately, and everything else. But it's scary to think about when you consider the implications of that, the potential of what's going on there. And then to go, okay, well, how much are we involved with that?
Yeah.
Is it all the way, like you said, like, is it all the way to the higher ranks? I don't know. But you look at, a lot of the stories going around with, not Eric Trump, one of them, like being besties with somebody from Saudi Arabia, and the Bidens, or are they friends with somebody in the Ukraine? Like, how much of that stuff goes on? Like, we'll never know. It could be just libel in a sense, but how much of that stuff is really going on that we just have no idea?
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, there's, especially with the way politics goes here, there's people are always hustling for money everywhere, trying to get favors, get gigs, favors, like nice offices, nice jobs after they come out of government. So in and out, there's just this revolving door. And because the U.S. has so much influence everywhere, like, hey, I'll get you some favors, random Ukrainian regulator in the securities area. There's a lot of stuff like that that's just kind of constant. Can't really get rid of it. But Saudi Arabia, yeah, these are just bad dudes. I mean, just baseline here, bad dudes. But they baseline bad dudes, but also unfortunately strategically placed bad dudes. The sand under their country has a lot of really cheap oil, and the world needs it. But I mean, I'll give a quick overview of like this, where this whole region is headed, because we might as well do that, because this Afghanistan is making us all think about it. So in the region, there's like basically three really big major countries, right? You got Saudi Arabia, you got Iran, and you got Turkey. And then you kind of got Israel just like floating along on the side, but not really quite up to this. You can't, if you're Jersey and you have like the size of Jersey and you have like 8-9 million people, you're not about to like rule any place with multiples more people than you. But these three, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, these are the big three. And there's kind of been more or less groups duking it out in these basic regions for thousands of years. There used to be Egypt back in the day too. You add in Egypt and these four big countries. You can keep Egypt such a mess now that I just kind of cut it out. But those four have been around forever in various forms. And the way it looks now, Iran, basically a disaster case. Its economy is shot. It's trying to do another like nuclear deal rodeo with the Biden administration to try and get some basic relief, but its entire economy was decimated by the sanctions Trump put on, and it's basically kind of non-functional. Saudi Arabia is just running on this oil it has, and that's kind of good, but it doesn't really let it do very much. And it has all these problems where it can't control its own religious factions. It's always kind of shooting itself in the foot. It also doesn't have a functional military. Like, it has amazing military equipment we've given it, but these guys suck. They can't like the same dudes who are doing like wheelies and going on their yachts and just they're just flying in models from Ukraine. They're not exactly training super hard to shoot people down in their fighter jets. It's not really a threat. I mean, the way this is going to work out is that it's going to end up with Turkey being the big dog in the region. Like, this is just kind of the way the chessboard has played out. Egypt's basically a basket case. Saudi Arabia is very strategic, but it doesn't have the heft to actually, it can kind of only create chaos. I think that's the best thing it can do. And it's doing it really well. Even 9/11, maybe we were supporting something that was kind of like, oh, maybe they'd hit the US, maybe they'd hit Western Europe. We didn't quite know. Oh my God, it turned out to be 9/11. You know what I mean? Something like that. Like, there's all sorts of things like that that could have totally been the case, but they can't actually stabilize anything. So they're actually kind of just kind of ruining things. But I mean, in the Middle East right now, I don't know if you guys know, one of the big stories the last 2 months has been Lebanon. You guys hear about what's going on in Lebanon? It's kind of scary. Basically, they've had one of the top 3 economic meltdowns of the last 150 years. The entire place is like decivilizing. Basically, they can't pay for food, they can't pay for fuel, they can't pay for electricity. This giant ammonia plant blew up in the port a year ago, and the government still hasn't formed afterwards. It still doesn't have a government since that explosion. And all the educated people in the country are leaving. All the doctors, they're literally leaving the country. They're not going to have doctors. That's kind of what we're looking at. And everyone, I mean, all the elite are putting their money into Swiss banks. It's a total collapse of the entire economic and political system in Lebanon. So that means there's basically a line of chaos going from Lebanon through Iraq, basically to Iran. Like, it's just like a fertile crescent of chaos. I don't know what to call it here. And it's awful. It's horrific. And the only way any of this is, I mean, unfortunately, most people, no one's going to be dipping their toes into this region for a long time. The only thing people care about is oil. And the really interesting thing is that the United States doesn't need Saudi Arabian oil anymore. Pretty sure the only state that actually still has a growing, even a relatively large percentage of Saudi oil imports is actually my home state of California, which is so brilliant that it doesn't want Texan oil. Said that was too dirty, so we're going to take literally bloody, dirty Saudi Arabian oil because that's so much better. Shout out to currently Governor Newsom there, although that wasn't really anyway. No, and so it's really bad, but really Saudi Arabia and everything going on there, this is about Europe, and this is about China, actually, and Japan and East Asia. These countries need Saudi Arabian oil. They need Gulf oil. They need, of the little small states below Saudi Arabia, nearby it. This is that's where all this comes from. And so what's bad about the U.S. leaving Iraq, leaving Afghanistan, probably pulling out of even like the sort of the Fifth Fleet and everything out of the region, it's who's gonna be trying to manage things. I mean, that's the terrible thing. Saudi Arabia is a miserable, menacing, malevolent fucking place in a lot of ways. And we'd kind of been the people who had to do deals with the devil. But now it doesn't look like we're going to do them anymore. So that's bad for a lot of other places.
So you left me really confused. Not as confused as you have in the past. But through the conversation we had last time, and some of the things you're saying now, it continues to seem like you hold the position that I'm generalizing here, but essentially that the rest of the world is falling apart in a sense, for the most part, or at least a lot of it. And a lot of people here feel like we're falling apart all at the same time, and everything's falling apart, but maybe everything's kind of falling apart as a whole, but maybe collectively gathering in these small, I don't know, as scary as it sounds, maybe these tribal groups again, whether, but like, what does that turn into? When we have, like, how can these places be existent for so long, on the grand scheme of things, and still continue to fall apart over and over and over again?
Yeah.
But in the U.S., we're seemingly doing well compared to everything else, but we've only been around for a couple hundred years. So is that our destiny as well?
I mean, I'd get back to geography, man. I'd get back to geography. I think the difference between the U.S., we feel psychologically like we're falling apart, but we're not shooting people to get fuel at a gas station.
Yeah.
We're not, giving a week's worth of pay to buy some milk. That's the big difference. It's the basic inputs that make like civilized life possible. Do you have food? Do you have energy? Do you have food supplies? Do you have basic housing, shelter, these sorts of things? I mean, this is what breaks down. I mean, when these things break down, then you have real problems. Like the whole Arab Spring in 2011, 13 kind of area. A lot of it was just because a lot of it was not about freedom, and the West kind of created this whole insane narrative about freedom flowering in the Middle East. It's like, no, food prices were just rising and people were pissed off. Basically, how that went. And it's really these basic things, like a place like China. It's like the paradigm case of a place that just rises and falls endlessly. Maybe Persia too, or modern Iran. But it's just these. They're not constant. The U.S., like I might have mentioned this last time, like the continental United States has never experienced a famine in our history, in American history, and China's at least 20, maybe 30 times older than the United States, and it's basically experienced in the last 2,000 years. It's experienced a famine every other year, and the last 1,000 years even like more often. There's just all these intricate balances that have to happen, right? If you have 1.2+ billion people, you have to feed all of them.
That's a lot of
people. You have to give them all housing and education and all this stuff. It's an enormous challenge. But you are right. Like my position generally is, I think the U.S. is psychologically in a total state, but it kind of reminds me of a teenager, like freaking out about their room, like they're in,
because we're afforded the opportunity.
No, it's kind of like well, so there's terrible things going on with like individuals in the country. Like I was talking to Tony earlier about just the addiction, the right. Massive, the social decay, the destroyed relation. That's actually like really on my mind recently, because it's really, I just see it everywhere. It's really terrible. But on the whole overall structure of things, I think is a lot more stable than we think. Like maybe that's a little kind of out there compared to how we kind of hear. But yeah, it just reminds me, like the country as a whole, not individuals. Like it reminds me of a kid who's like 15 and he's just freaking out about every little social thing and how he's doing on this team and what this person is thinking, and he thinks the world's coming to an end, and then you move on. It's summer, he's super happy, he doesn't remember it. It's very immediately emotional. I think part of it is that we don't have this greater sense of history, because you nailed it. You like the real question is like, okay, maybe we've been good up till now, but now we're going to start going through these same miserable cycles that all these other countries seem to go through. It's a real question. I think that kind of my read on our sort of the systems we have, the country, the resources, is I don't think that's going to happen. It could happen. There's a lot, just crazy things can happen, but I think that we have enough of our, we keep our wits about us. We can definitely figure it out. Ooh, but the real challenge is this communication stuff. It's the communication. It's this social decay. It's like people don't talk to other people. One weird thing is I talk to everybody. I talk to everybody usually, unless they're like very skittish. I talk to them basically exactly like I'm talking to you guys. There's no like other form of me. Like people have like a lot of different styles. I just have one. So I talked to a friend of mine. She's basically really QAnon kind of person. Unexpectedly, kind of like filtered in through her mother's like Facebook groups probably, but she's very low key. Doesn't even realize what she is, but that's that. I have other friends who are super liberal, like basically communists. I have there's all these people, and I find once you peel that away and you get people to talk about, there's so many more interesting things about people than all these little political beliefs they have. But that's all we can focus on now. It's crazy. It's really mind blowing to me.
What do you think?
I think.
Do you think it's media driven, or
I think it's the loss of art, dude. I think it's the loss of the loss of art, religion, history. I think also we're really tortured by sort of broken personal relationships, man. Like, you're married, you have a kid. I know people, it's like they're so isolated. They don't have any relationships. They don't have any sense of confidence. They don't get social feedback. Like, they don't know who they are because they don't interact with enough people that are giving them feedback on what they're like. It's real bad. It's real bad. That stuff's real bad. It opens us up to believe like the number of people I know who are normal and started believing all sorts of weird conspiracy theories. Not because like I'm happy. I love talking about conspiracy theories a lot of times because I think it's fun.
It's a great. It's fun.
But then you talk about like I'm like 5 months ago. You talk to a friend of mine. It's like 5 months ago, you didn't believe in anything. Now all you believe in is this. That's weird. That's weird. That there's a big hole. There's a big hole that you just poured in, chemtrails into. and that's and that's what you are right now. So that stuff's probably.
Maybe it's worth believing then. The lizard aliens, all of the things. Maybe it's real.
Yeah, it is. But there's something interesting about it. There's something more compelling than this mundane, incomprehensible, continuous, chaotic sort of muddle that life feels like. So we don't have good stories these days. We don't have all the movies. Like I was just telling, my sister was telling me about some patient of hers. She's a doctor, and she was saying that basically a family goes to like Disneyland. It's California. They go to Disneyland like twice a week, and they go all the time because Disney movies, I guess, are all the culture that remains, and that's kind of like the happy place, I guess. Like go to Disneyland, it's like where all the good stories are or something. A friend of mine's wife's sister is also an adult, and she does like cosplay as her thing. Like she's dressing up as like anime characters and Disney characters and stuff, and she's an adult, man. She's an adult, and I'm just like, a lot of these things to me feel very like certain shifts or something aren't made, or certain paths are no longer visible to people. That's kind of what I see with that.
Do you think that's more of, you mentioned it earlier, and I know Tony talks about it a lot, that it's that the creation of art, being able to create something, feeling like you're doing something, or do you think it's because, or maybe a duality of both, that because we have it better than we've ever had as, these human beings, this life that we live is so much easier that we don't have to worry about surviving and hunting down food or gathering food and, building shelters, and that because of technology, that it's made life so efficient that we're searching and our genes are just reaching out for something? Or is it, something completely different, and we're just losing our minds and going to cosplay just because we're losing our marbles?
It feels like just now as I think about it, it feels like a combo of the two. It's like life seem on the surface better than ever, but I think it's a spiritually and emotionally and relationally and psychologically like arid and dystopian environment. You know what I mean? It's like the actual, it's like, science and technology gave us a lot of these things, but the sort of worldview of just like secular humanism, where everyone is, humans are great and life is great because we're moving forward. It just doesn't seem to sustain human beings. It doesn't seem to sustain our beliefs, our motivations, or anything. And I mean, I think it's terrible. And I'm curious, Tony, what do you think about the art? Because I'm honestly, actually, I'm on this is kind of fun. I'm on Facebook Marketplace, trying to sell I got one of those sleep rings that I thought I would use. I didn't use it, but I want to sell it and get a really cheap keyboard, because I got lessons when I was a kid, and suddenly over the pandemic, like that's something that I want to have like one around, just even to noodle around on. So I definitely feel that art impulse is like, there's something generative about that when you feel that. Some people, I think it's like you really need it. And yeah, it seems maybe it's tougher to do. It's hard to feel for or something. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a minimum, at least the consumption of art, but I think like the real fruit comes out of the production of art too, while kind of consuming it as well. For me, at least, it was something where, like I obviously loved music, but I felt like once I actually started writing music or like learned to play some guitar, then it was almost transformative. And then it became like a sense of therapy and more connection with the world, where you were just kind of putting some different energy out there.
Yeah, I'll show you. I mean, it's obviously not visible, but
oh,
nice.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah, it's like I get when I'm writing, when I'm doing stuff. I played since I was a teenager, and I feel like the need, like my finger. I'll get this like, you ever get that where you're just like, your hand feels like it wants to move around on the frets or something. So even just doing nothing quickly, it's very restorative. So I agree, man. I mean, I think one of the challenges though is that our art these days, I'll say it, I think it sucks, dude. I think it sucks. Like it's so corporate. Like I think of the Star Wars, the recent Star Wars series, where it's like a whole thing like made by committee. Like I actually liked part of it. I thought it was kind of fun, but I just remember like when I was a kid, I saw the first Star Wars. That was insane to me. I don't know how you guys, I was just like, what? Like space, like lights. It was like the whole thing felt so imaginative and wild and unbelievable. it was just stunning. And then now it's so redundant. There's so many sequels. It's like we can't. Yeah, refurbished. It's like we need new stuff. I mean, we're thirsting for new ideas and new beliefs and new interactions and experiences and visuals and ideas and songs and lyrics. And it feels so remixed, refurbished, and not what we need. I don't know.
Well, maybe I won't go there. But the we Tony always, he talks about art and creating these new things. And today it's funny, I sent him a message, and there's an artist that it's been a while, but I had mentioned something. I was like, like he just doesn't do it for me anymore. He's like, well, why? And I was like, I feel like he kind of sold out. And maybe and I said at the time I said he sold out, but it didn't quite believe that. I didn't quite feel what I meant. But just today I heard my playlist was just kind of on random, and I heard this artist singing, and I was like, oh, I know who this is because he's singing. I said, but I've never heard the song before. I was like, but this is really good. I really, really like this. So I looked it up, and it was him singing for a band like 13 years ago. And it was like, oh, like, this is what I like. And I mentioned to him, and I was like, I said, it's funny that we've talked about this artist before, that it seems kind of like he sold out. And that wasn't quite the word I wanted, but now, like, listening to his stuff when he was just part of a band years and years and years ago, it was like, there's something about like the pain, maybe not necessarily the pain, but like the suffering and the working through something and the struggling and the angst and the struggle that comes along with making art when you're not successful, or when you're not just sitting on top of the cloud, and just being able to, once you've made it, like, it's hard to make something. And we had the same discussion with a friend of ours that was on the podcast. He was an author that just semi-recently I talked to him, and he was struggling with his writing. And he said, because I asked him, hey, how's it going? How's life? What are you working on? How's your writing going? And he said, life's great, but the writing's not so great. He said, and maybe it's because life is so great, that's why my writing's not so great, because I have a hard time, connecting with struggle. And art, in the same sense, is kind of a connection with struggle and trying to create something out of that struggle. And it was like, I didn't understand it until like today. It was like, oh yeah, okay, bing, light bulb. Like,
there's something to that. I've also noticed, just a super small point. Everyone is feels like everyone's a solo operator these days. You used to have like bands. Now it just feels like it's individuals that occasionally collaborate, but there's no real dynamic with them. You don't feel like this merger of two, sort of artistic inspirations, with the Beatles, the Pink Floyd, with Blink-182, with Green Day, with all these things, random band. It feels like it's all more solo. I don't know if you guys notice that too. Everyone breaks off right away now. Oh, I was with it, now I'm just me. Very individualistic in a way. It's kind of more limiting somehow to people. Maybe they're not getting sort of interactions and tensions that you used to get. I don't know.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that, where it's, I really love a good solo artist, but when it's raw and acoustic, that really gets me. But that I guess I never used to. I don't know any older artists that are like that, because I really enjoy a lot of older bands, because maybe there's some synergy there. But you make a good point. Like the newer stuff where it's someone's going solo, it's this person and their band, but their band just seems very run of the mill and very produced.
Yeah,
there's something that's missing from
K-pop. Dude, I found this article online. Dude, some guy did a deep dive. It's a random like white dude in America did a deep dive on K-pop. That shit's crazy. All of these bands are fake. They're all produced by companies. Every single one. They go through factories. Everything is A/B tested. It's so weird. It's like the total opposite spectrum where it's just like, it's all fake, man. It's all like the NSYNC 90s boy bands, girl bands forever. Like that's basically, it's like a fossilized version of that ruling Asia forever in pop culture.
So
I think that's crazy.
Actually, that's one of the other things I had on my mind to ask you about. So recently, going back all the way to China, I feel like I don't want to because the conversation's good. But and an interesting kind of aspect of that is recently, so China not only essentially banned Bitcoin mining and all those things, but they have recently, I saw, like, put into, I don't know if legislation is even a word there, but they started trying to remove more like effeminate males off of TV and the gaming restrictions that they've put on kids. Where it's like you can game for like, it's like 3 hours during a weekend for like under 18. Like, so like, is that just them trying to, obviously they're trying to control the population, but like, I just didn't know what you thought of those kind of news stories that came out of there.
It's funny because last time I gave like the wide view. It's like, they're controlling their population. They're like, well, so why in this way? Why are they controlling it specifically in this weird ass way? So they're doing a whole raft of things. You know, they're taking down the tech company titans. You probably heard about all that, right? Like knocking down, Jack Ma and all these people. They're basically trying to show that they're top dog in China, right? It's like China is ruled by the party, and we do all this. And there's a lot of things that are coming at youth these days right now. The first one that hit was really actually about private tutoring. So in China, your whole life is really determined by how well you do on basically a big test that you have to take. High school, end of high school test. Very similar in Japan and South Korea. It's a big test. It's like miserable. It's funny. It's kind of like the Confucian examinations of like forever, but more miserable, way more people and grueling. So there's all these testing companies, kind of like the Kaplans, that kind of stuff, that have come up to basically teach people so they could do better on these tests. But it's so important in China, this test. It's like determines the college you go into, which determines the kind of company you can work at. It's so regimented. There's just an enormous industry around it, and it's a major place with major site of social tensions, right? This person getting, even in the US we have that, where there's some scandal with like rich Hollywood people getting their kids into schools. Like it's like they're hitting that, and they're actually all these things at youth. So there was the tutoring, which is like, all these things like kids were like too overworked, they weren't learning. It's funny, they're hitting them like, hey, you're studying too much. Don't do that. You can't do that. It's like, also, you're playing too many video games. Don't do that. And part of this on a broader level is just that the difficult, dangerous aspect of a population tends to be the young. So not 18 minus, but typically like 18 to 26, 15 to 26 kind of range. These are the people that like rebel and cause problems historically. These are the people that are in revolutions and all that. And, in, like we were talking about in the Middle East, they have really young populations. That's part of the reason they're always controlling them so much. And China has weirder things where it has a small, comparatively smaller young youth generation coming in, but these kids have way fewer opportunities than the last generation. So we talked last time how China's kind of blown its load, right? It's had this massive explosion of growth, and now everything's shrinking. Every year the growth goes down. So if you're about to enter college, it doesn't seem like the best time, right? It seems like actually the whole world the whole image they're projecting of this rejuvenated China, all this, the rhetoric is behind where things are. So they're very worried about how people are going to respond to life in China now. They're hitting all sorts of different areas, and so just for the video games, there's kind of a weird thing. There's kind of like two ways they could play this. It's like Brave New World or what is it, 1984, right? You either want people playing games all day long, so they're like docile and they're like gonna just, eat soma or whatever. Did you guys ever read Brave New World? I actually listened to Brave New World for the first time a couple weeks ago. It was like an audiobook. That book's crazy. I highly recommend it. It's only like 8 hours or something. I read it while driving around.
I have not read that one.
It's really, really, that book is super cool. And I'm glad I had a friend I talked to. I got really excited, told a friend about it. He's like, yeah, I read that in high school. I was like, stupid. No, high school's not the time. It's way better when you're older, I think. But
I feel the same about 1984.
Yeah.
Because I never read it in high school, but reading it now, I'm like, high school me never would have understood a damn thing about that.
Yeah. I was thinking the exact same thing. Well, in Brave New World, they basically, they have this master drug called soma that just makes you feel great whenever you want. And they dole it out to the population to keep them content and happy all the time. So there's no rebellion, there's no problem. And so that's one thing you do. You have people play video games and drugs and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of leads to a docile population. Or you need the people to be productive, to be engaged. Like China's just very worried about what its people are going to do. And it's kind of lashing out in all sorts of weird directions. But it's very worried. I mean, the Chinese people are fatter than they've ever been. They're addicted to the internet like everybody else. I mean, the weird thing about all this is that China is, I love this topic because China's hitting on things we all know are a problem, but it's responding in ways that we know aren't the best and are a bit too extreme. You know what I mean? Like, kids probably shouldn't be playing video games all day long. Like, that's not right. Maybe you guys disagree. I don't know. But like, going outside's good. But also like the government regulating. Like, my first thought is like, hell no, you can't do that. I'll play video games all day just because you can't. You're telling me I can't, kind of thing. But yeah, no. So there's a real challenge in this because everyone, the big line that came out was that a regulatory ministry in China called video games electronic opium, which is a big word in China because it's associated with the Opium Wars and with national weakness and decline, and also in certain respects effeminacy, because there's a historically it's been called like sort of Han chauvinism, something like that. There's very much a sense where there's a masculine element to these sort of imperial governments and impulse in China. And yeah, so that kind of relates to the whole effeminacy. I think it was like the girly men. What was it called?
Yeah, there's something like that. Yeah,
I took Schwarzenegger's word, I think.
Oh, the girly man, yeah. It is fascinating how there's often so much depth, particularly in some of those things that are kind of put out there that a lot of people don't necessarily catch those side meanings and kind of the things that are meant to be said, but they're not explicitly said. It's I find that kind of stuff fascinating because a lot of people just don't. It's gone. It's over their head. They never realize it, and then it's like this is what they're really saying because they said this. They said these precise words to make you feel something that you didn't necessarily understand they were saying, but you felt it anyway. Like it's like, oh, okay. Like
they have a propaganda department, right? Like it's like they have like we have a commerce department. They have a propaganda department, and like what you were talking about with the Twitter in Saudi Arabia, the level of internet surveillance in China is so out of like proportion. Like it's so the surveillance state is insane. I mean, there's 400. I think it's like 430 million surveillance cameras in China.
That's more people than we have here.
That's more people than we have here. Like it's an insane world. And you're right. So one of the things, there's a lot of guys who they're kind of China experts, and what they do is they're really good with Chinese, and they read all of the statements that the Chinese governments and agencies say. And it's kind of like the Soviet Union. They were like Kremlinologists, where they have all these special coded links. Yeah. Most of this is just so like you don't even want to dive there, man. Like it's like I remember I was saying I sort of had to crawl through the nonsense of like rhetoric and then law and all this, and like it's like it was when I finally came up against like the absolutely impenetrable wall of ever changing Chinese propaganda that I was like, I'd rather just learn how things really are in the basic. I don't need to learn the minutia of all these different phrases. But it's real, man. They have these Baroque like formulations for everything, and it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to see if I could add another comment on the effeminacy and the video games, the entertainment stuff. I mean, one way to think about that's big is that, in China, the last 20, 30 years, there's been kind of a trade-off going on where you didn't have political freedom, but you sort of had personal freedom. If you didn't talk about the government and you didn't disrespect the government, you didn't sort of try and take down the government or do anything talk about anything related to politics, they didn't really give a shit what you did. So on the ground, you weren't like oppressed by a daily basis by most things. They didn't bother. They had bigger things. Didn't have the manpower to even do that. What we're seeing now is that sort of trade-off is kind of coming to an end. Your personal life, more elements of your personal freedoms, not even personal freedoms, just like things they didn't bother about, like things you could do. They hadn't told you couldn't do, but they still could tell you couldn't do. I don't know. That actually didn't help me either. But basically, those personal freedoms, they're going away. And that's a major thing. It used to be that you couldn't talk about politics, but you could just live your life. And that was a big reason why the Communist Party, if I took a poll 5 years ago, 60% of the country probably would have approved of it, right? Can't take a poll in China, but that's probably how it would have went. Like, because they did good. They modernized the country, and right. China, they're worried about chaos, so it really it mattered to them. Now it's changing. I mean, all these impacts on very basic things, on controlling the minutia of also they're regulating celebrity gossip and all sorts of bizarre, like and basically Hollywood star, their equivalent of Hollywood stars. All these things are being micro-regulated now. It's a sign of a very desperate state that's trying to control every little facet of the cultural landscape to accord with the world it wants to present to everybody. It's not going to be successful, although it could amble along for a pretty long time the way they've set things up there. If no sort of major event comes to smack the economy, but
well, maybe that was why I was like kind of struck by that. It was like, well, it's kind of one of those things where if you're as ridiculous as the trying to stop showing as many effeminate men on TV as you can, like, okay, like, oh, that could be seen as I don't know, bigoted or whatever. But like why? That seems a little ridiculous. Okay, maybe because of the culture, they're trying, not to. They're trying to build up their boys to become into strong military men. Okay, I kind of get it. But like, are you really like threatened by that? I mean, you have how many? 1.2 billion people or whatever it is. Like it just seems striking, but maybe that's more what it is they feel like they're maybe losing control of the society that they've tried to hold control on for so long. But at the same time, like, it's such a vast country. Like I continue to appreciate, the conversations around this, because it's something that is almost, it's barely comprehensible from, like, I have a hard time comprehending the entire United States in its size and the population, but then realizing that China is more than 4 times the population, obviously not 4 times the size, but still bigger. And it's like, I can't even imagine, like, our government does a terrible job of trying to keep all this like in bounds. And there's so many factors that come into play that it's just, it's so fascinating to not only be able to attempt to comprehend all these things and talk about these things, but to be able to, even more so do them from halfway across the United States at the same time, like, and be able to have these discussions. It's trying to jam all that into one, thought it hurts my brain.
Dude, I don't mean to interrupt you guys. I'm going to let you guys continue, man, but I got 3 jobs I have to work tomorrow, and it's getting after 10:30 here. So
yeah,
no, you guys are please. I love the conversation, love to continue. I just have a long ass day of 3 jobs.
Sounds good.
I didn't even realize what time it was.
Well,
I'll let you.
It was good.
Continue,
I loved your question, man. That was hitting at stuff that I've been. It's like when your brain turns off and it just starts mulling on, like, chewing on, like, some social element of the world. That's kind of where my brain's been going a lot. So that was now no one asked me questions like that, so it's good.
No, I asked that just because it's interesting and it's on my brain a lot, but also just because I deal with substance abuse and as well as mental health.
Right.
And so I see it climbing and getting more and more serious. Not that it wasn't ever serious before, but it's just become, like, incredibly prevalent in areas where you wouldn't even think it would be prevalent. And even in,
is it going younger? Is it going younger too?
It is going younger. I have plenty of patients where they're like, man, I have to find some therapy for my children. And I'm like, oh no, this is not good.
I went surfing with a woman who, she's mid-40s. She has 2 kids. They're teenagers. And she was just telling me, like, both of her kids, 14, 16, she's like, they both, like, retreated into their rooms, and they now, she's trying to figure out what to do. Like, they just kind of, during the pandemic, she kind of lost them.
Yeah.
And so I just, that stuff's, it's bad. It's really bad. And it must be tough to see it too. Jeez.
Yeah, it is, man. So I'm doing the best I can. And like I said, man, trying to put that good energy back out into the world. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's the best we can do. I mean, I don't know. I'm just before, I don't want to take, I'm not trying to keep
you're good.
but I kind of feel like I'm naturally an optimistic, kind of happy person, just temperament, like pure temperament kind of thing. But I also was one of the persons, like, I went through, like, a dark night of the soul where I was just miserable and I was depressed and I was angry, and, like, I'm like, and it's kind of like, it's only coming out of that, kind of seeing it from the other side, that I really got the empathy to understand, like, what's up with people. And I'm curious, like, have you guys had a similar sort of, like, thing? Like, because I feel like there's some people I see who are really happy, and I'm just like, you don't understand. you don't get it. You live in a bubble and you'll never understand. Like, do you guys ever get that sense? Like, you really got to feel it to experience it, to get it.
I mean, I think, and you're specifically speaking of, like, the mental health or the substance abuse or anything in general that is just a negative consequence of.
Yeah, the major consequence, like major injury, disability, mental health, a brief addiction, something like that. Like, just where you have to kind of kind of move through it to truly understand it. Maybe that was just my personal experience. Maybe I'm kind of mapping it for a lot of other people.
I don't know, because I guess I've never had a substance abuse problem myself. But I feel like I treat it very effectively. But I think I've had other maybe addiction problems, if you will. They were just pointed in different directions that were slightly more constructive or possibly destructive, and just never led down that same path, or got caught, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about that question, just because I've heard different veterans get upset, when they talk to a doctor who wasn't in combat, and they're like, you don't understand what I'm going through with PTSD. Like, how can you treat me?
Yeah.
I hear too, people are like, I'm a cardiologist. Like, I didn't have to have a heart attack to understand how to treat you. So
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I kind of see both sides of that, I guess. And for me, I think it just comes down to, I didn't experience that, but, like, I'm going to try and understand exactly what you're going through. And while I never walk through your shoes, I'm going to shut my mouth and I'm going to listen. And I'm truly going to try and take in, like, what you're saying. And like I said, man, do my best to, point that person in the right direction, or encourage them to redefine themselves. Or, like I said, put that good energy back out into the world. So
right. Yeah, sounds good. Also, just that last thing you said about kind of how we walked. I feel like I'd kind of walked down a path that, like, I didn't get quite as far as someone. That really resonated. And I feel like there's a lot of things where it's just like I was just a couple steps back. The reason I didn't end up kind of where some of my friends did.
Yeah.
Very weird.
I say that it's weird, man. My substance abuse patients will come in, and you can tell they're usually pretty quiet. And then I think they've been around a lot of people that judge them or found them to be a bit inferior. And I go in and I look just like this. I never wore a white coat. I never wore scrubs. Just always rocking the beard, rocking the hat, and they get pretty comfortable early on, and they're like, "Oh, you're one of us." And I'm like, "Yeah, I breathe the same air. Like I have the same heartbeat. Like I've made some similarly bad decisions and probably good decisions. You know, one of them being here because you're trying to get treatment. Yeah, I always tell them, I'm like, I could be sitting there and you could be sitting here. So like, I would want that person to treat me, you know, with the level of respect that I'm going to treat you, and the level of, you know, basically love that I'm going to try and show you through actually caring. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're going to need your sleep.
I am, man.
Sounds good.
It was great chatting with you again.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It is getting late.
It's late. I hear you.
Yeah. But, you know, I feel like there is a lot that we can continue forward on that doesn't necessarily have to do with China or anything else, particularly. So I feel like we should just, it's a great point to end on, listening to you guys talk about it, and come on again soon.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good. There's a lot. And I really do like talking to you guys because, you know, we have, I feel like we have similar brains that they like to go all sorts of different places. Like, this is my natural way my brain works. Like, I feel like you're always saying like, oh, like it's free flowing. It's like, I know it might be weird. It's like, that's how my brain goes. It's like, let's talk about art. Let's talk about history. Let's talk about China. Let's talk about K-pop. You know, like that's it's good. I think it's where the ideas, that's where the connections happen. And no, it's important, man. I don't know, you guys. It's funny. Like I talk so much about China that I think it's getting to the point where like the real stuff that we were hidden is actually, you know, it's definitely more compelling to me. Like I was telling Tony just at the end, like that the stuff, like these articles, the people, like it's been really, really impacted me. You know, part of it also might be like because things seem to came together a bit for me, and I see how for other people they've been unwinding. I think it's forcing me to look at it. You know, maybe that's part of it, that it just keeps come back into my brain. At least it's weird.
I will. I'll tack onto that too, and it's been a struggle for me, and I've talked about on our show before where, you know, since the pandemic happened, like you mentioned, where it seemed to be a big point where a lot of people started falling apart.
Yeah.
It was one of many, probably not the biggest moment in my life, but one of the bigger pivotal points in my life where there was a change that was like, okay, I can do something here. You know, I can take this and sit and wallow in it, or I can do something with it. You know, the extra time, or, you know, I'm not traveling around for work as much as I was, and be able to do something with it. And that's, you know, what this was. So I think it would be silly of me to say that, you know, as a whole, that the whole pandemic thing was a negative thing for me, because it's 90%, I'm sure this is the reason we're doing this right now. So, you know,
yeah,
it's a huge benefit in a sense too.
And also, like we're like we said earlier, we're the type that we can sit by ourselves alone, and we didn't end up on the streets. So it's like just that baseline.
Yeah, and it's not always been easy.
Yeah,
you know, like you're talking about, you know, it was there was a point, and I've said this on the show too, where it was early on where we talked about different things and kind of going down different paths in life, where one of the biggest wake up calls to me is I got to a point, and it wasn't to a terrible point, like in regards of some people's, you know, living conditions and aspects of their life. But I realized that one of the biggest wake ups I had was I got to a point in my life where I felt like I was looking at a fork in the road. And I realized at that moment, this could potentially be the last time I see a fork in the road if I choose the wrong one. And it, like,
wow.
That moment that it hit me, I was like, I could be at the moment in my life right now, and it was weird. It was very surreal sitting there and thinking about, like, I could walk out the store and never be able to correct or fix, what the path ahead of me. And it was like, whoa, it was a wake up call. But some people, maybe they don't get that chance, or they were never given the tools to have that chance, or they were never intercepted by somebody that was willing to open their mind to that chance. So it's like, it really opens the eyes, it
does. And I think just us talking, like, part of what I'm always trying to do is give people, even though I'm talking about miserable things all the time, it's like, I try to be a bit empowering with it, because there's way more. People have a lot of power and potential in them to do great things, good things, noble things, and it's sad that, like you said, there's not enough people who intercept people at the right time to even let them remember that or realize that for the first time. So it's sad. It's sad, but we're doing our little part, I think.
Yeah, and I look forward to everything that you plan on doing. I am super stoked. Is the course coming along?
Not really. I mean, basically, I'm writing what happened to me so my dad got COVID bad, and then for like 3 weeks, I was kind of helping him out. And actually, so my parents are in LA, and then I have another brother in LA, and I have family also in San Francisco. And so that kind of derailed. Actually, I was supposed to be in Israel this month, and that derailed. Then my dad got COVID, and I ended up kind of just losing a bunch of this month trying to do stuff, trying to help with that, and figure out my one vacation in 2 years or something, 3 years, something like that, destroyed. And actually, it was the third thing I was trying to do. Like, it was like just everything was just like no. So I kind of bogged down writing a big article about China in space, basically. Like, what are they up to? Where are they going to the moon? What is all this? Got sick of this stuff, and then just expanded. So it's really big, and it's been taking a while. And then I'm doing a podcast episode on the Communist Party. Basically, like, what is actually going on? Like, how does this thing function? What the hell does it mean that a party runs things? Like, we have like party people that here, and they go into the government there. So those two things and are the main ones. And then, book and the course. I mean, the course is still mostly not in place. I'm actually trying to get some money to try and help spin it up, because it's one of those things where I can't do it all, man. Like, it's I'm a bit of a one-man band here. Like, I interviewed this professor, and she's a writing professor. She's like, you need to get an editor, and you need to get this. And I'm like, dude, if I hired all the people that I needed to do all these things, it's like none of it would pencil out. So we'll see. But yeah, the coolest thing, the new podcast episode should be pretty dope. I think you'll like it. China articles, absurd. It probably shouldn't even exist, but I'm gonna eventually get done with it. And then the book and the course is definitely gonna happen, because it's so valuable. It's just, I know once I start, it's gonna take. A lot of it is taking all these things I just mouth off articulately, but not in the best presented form.
Right.
Is trying to remove all that, condense it, and get it to the essence. That takes a long time. So ideally, I would do that when the book is done, because otherwise it's gonna eat up stuff. But the other thing, I have YouTube, like, little live streams I'm doing like once a week. I just kind of mouth off about a topic. So I talked about China, like a Beijing stock exchange. I think it was today. I do it kind of once a week. I'm trying to do stuff that gets more out there, because I end up focusing and trying to perfect these things. It's probably maybe putting too much into it, but that's kind of where things are. Mm-hmm. It's also, I've just been, it's funny how you really resonated with me when you were talking about the writer, where he thinks the writing isn't going well because his life is going well. I've just been, I've just been outside, man. It's been like a beautiful summer. It feels like, I wasn't able to go to Israel, and so that was the whole thing. Like, I'm Jewish, so I was getting a free ticket basically, because I never did the whole go to Israel thing. So that was awesome. Like, I felt great, but didn't pan out. So I've been surfing a lot. I've been like hiking. I've just been trying to like take a little staycation sort of thing recently. That's
Well, if there's one thing people need more of these days is vitamin D from the sun. So and just to get out there in fresh air. So
it's good.
So you mentioned you got a new podcast coming out, and that's on your normal podcast channel. If you want,
China Unraveled. Sticking with it. And after this one, I think I might change up. I might have been telling you last time. I'm really thinking of changing up the format because these are almost like video essay, kind of written, kind of audio essays. But I want to give people more. like originally, actually, had a cousin who recommended like a 20-minute format. He was like, "Dude, like, I love you, Jason, because I love you." But people who don't know you, they don't want to hear you mouth off about China for 2 hours. I was like, well, maybe you're right. So I did that. So I really kind of made these kind of crafted little audio essays. But I want to give more, man. I'm trying to do more interviews too. I was supposed to do another one today. It's just kind of, ideally I'd be focusing on one thing like the book and just doing it. But there's just so many, I want to be connecting with more people. I think that's a big part of why I like the interviews and like the podcast. I get letters and emails and stuff from people. And it really, like talking to you, part of the reason it's so great is because you're telling me what people want to hear about. Like your questions and your observations and your emotional sort of reads on where things are. It tells me a lot about what I should talk about and what people really want to hear. The problem when I'm sitting in a cave is that you just don't get that feedback.
Right.
So it's dangerous to just write a book in a corner all day and think it's going to be exactly what people want. It's like, no, you have to be talking to people. But so I had to kind of encourage myself to keep talking to people through random means. So writing stuff, doing videos, doing podcasts. It just means I'm also spread really thin.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Well, I guess that's one piece that I've tried to focus on is because I've realized that at least the normal people I interact with, not normal people, the typical people I interact with, my brain doesn't always work the same as theirs does. And, theirs doesn't work the same as mine does. And guess what? Mine doesn't work the same as Elon Musk's does. Or, so like all of our brains, they kind of interact in the interface and they think about different things differently. So what we've tried to do is just try to I guess in a sense, we've tried to just not think about that and just to have communication in general. Because when we started this, it was I heard a lot when I was talking about starting a podcast. It was like, well, it has to be constructed. It has to be this. You have to stay on topic. It has to have all these things. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. In my like normal people don't think like that. And like, sometimes that's great, but sometimes people just want to sit with other people and hear, in real time how their brain's working and how it just spews out. So like I've really connected with that on a whole different scale of people. So I don't know if it's working or not, but people seem to be connecting with it. And, when you realize that, hey, that person thinks different than I do, but it's still really interesting. And, finding different things to connect to different people with. So I think that's
the best, man. I think it's the best. Like really, like, I'd love to do a podcast where I just talk to people all the time. But I'm trying, once I committed to doing this book, I am trying to nail down this information to give people something I think is valuable. And so writing, and it's just, I don't know if you ever write or just write for fun or anything, but writing's real good for your brain, man. It helps you be articulate. It sucks. It's miserable. It's miserable. But like, even while talking to you, I'll notice I'll say something where it's like, why am I saying this? It's like, oh my God, like I remember suffering to write a paragraph and this is the words that came out, and your brain's just like, it knows it's good. So it comes out. It's very helpful.
I don't have too many. I have a couple. So we started every once in a while we'll do, cause our shows are so random. I've done a couple, we call it, curiosity with a course. So we're like, because we touch on so many different things across so many different, aspects that we've only done a few of them, but I'll pick a topic and do, a half an hour to an hour, like a normal kind of constructed podcast. And some of them haven't come out yet, but I've written in a sense, and you can hear it by the way I'm reading it. So like I do a little bit of that, but that's just, I got a day job too.
No, I know, right?
But it is fun. It's a good exercise, for your brain.
Yeah,
so I totally
that's all I was gonna say. Yeah, it's just it feels like exercise for your brain in certain ways. Like just like it does. But no, man, I love what you're doing. This is literally my favorite type of podcast, probably to listen to, and then probably definitely to talk on. Because it's that freedom for your ideas to actually move. Like this is why I hate so much of the world we live in. It's just because it feels like the ability for free thinking, public free thinking, interchange of ideas just feels so limited. This is the only place you can get it. Basically. I don't know if maybe I'm wrong. I'm not trying to statement. I'm just curious. If you know another place, please tell me.
Yeah, no, same here. I agree. It's this format of people being able to connect and, talk. And I know I mentioned it last time you were on where, obviously this is great that I can talk to you from literally almost the opposite ends of the United States. Yeah. This is phenomenal. And I feel greatly blessed to be able to do it. But even then, like, you still lose something across a camera and a TV, but it's better than nothing. It's definitely better than Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or those other things. But, just to be able to, and maybe that's, we've said it 1,000 times, but the last year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is now, with this, everything going on, like there's just this human connection that we've lost in it.
Totally.
It scares me the further we get away from that, what that'll do to us.
And I think that's why I keep focusing on the kids, man. Not the kids, like the children. But I mean, like Tony's asked me that question, like, because I see kids. I'm near an elementary school, and I can see kids walking around. It'll be 3 kids staring at their phones and not talking to each other, or like they're slowly they're not even walking next to each other because they're just on their phone. They just lose. They don't even walk next to each other. They just like you stop at the light. You see them. One kid just falls behind. He doesn't even notice because he's so on his phone. I worry about that stuff, man. It's the root of some bad news that seems to be moving around. But yeah, well, we should. We'll cut here. But as always, Fred, it was great, and I'll definitely come back.
Yeah, you let me know. I will next time. I'll sit off to the side and I'll let Tony ask some questions because he's got some good ones, but he likes to maybe not likes. He tends to stay quiet. And
he seems like he's space. Yeah, it makes sense. I wanted to ask him that but he definitely, I detect this deep listening kind of person. He is. That's
a very good description. He's a deep listening person, and as soon as if it lets it sit there for a little bit, he will absolutely engage and ask some questions that I will never think of. But my problem is I like to just interject and talk because I have so many like surface level questions. My brain's just constantly going. I'll just spew out whatever's in my head, and it often overtakes, the conversation.
So you definitely work in like different rhythms, right? It's like the wavelengths. One's like the slow one, then you're like.
Yes, that's and every once in a while, because we got together doing music. Actually, the podcast that we just put out, but this morning, technically it's Monday, so this will come out next Monday. But we played one of an original song that he wrote the lyrics to, and I wrote a guitar piece too, kind of honoring service men and women that have kind of given their lives to the country, and it's called 13 Folds, the fold the flag, and he's a deep thinker, that's for sure. Yeah, and so sometimes our sine waves or whatever it might be kind of meet up, and we create
it's something cool. Yeah, I'm gonna listen to that. That sounds good. I've been very musically inspired recently. I'm not a little bit to write, but just like I've been, do you ever get through a phase where you remember a lot of lyrics? Like I don't usually remember lyrics all the time, but I feel like I've been remembering all of them. It's like very weird. My brain's focusing on it for some reason. So
must have heard some good ones.
Yeah. Well, let's let you get to sleep, man.
Yeah.
Let's let you do it.
Like I said,
you gotta
let
sleep.
me know whenever you want to come back on, and we'll, like I said, I plan on having you on towards the end of the year. So if you want, we can still do that. And I appreciate you, coming back on much sooner than what I
no problem.
expected.
I feel like what's going to happen is there's going to be some random shenanigans that goes down, and I'll see it. It'll be like a couple days of it or something. And I'll be like, all right, we'll just do it. We'll do it soon. We'll do it sooner than expected.
Hit us up. I appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, Fred. See you.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Take care.
Thank you for hanging out with us on this episode.
Appreciated as always, and if you have any questions, comments, ideas, or guest suggestions, leave them in the comments after you subscribe to the channel, or visit chroniccuriosity.com to get in contact with us.
And the store, which you can pick yourself up some fantastically curious merchandise.
Until next time, that's it.